I stood frozen at the podium, certificate in hand, as Petra sauntered into the conference room. Every eye tracked her movement. The boss's daughter, who'd spent more time posting office party photos than learning our product line. My moment of triumph evaporated as she approached, designer heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. "Excuse me, everyone," she announced, her voice cutting through the congratulatory murmurs. "There's been a slight adjustment to today's announcement." The room fell silent. 3 years of 2 a.m. product launches, saved accounts, and international conference calls had led to this moment. My promotion to Senior Development Manager. Now Petra was looking at me with the detached interest of someone studying an insect. After careful consideration, she continued, not bothering to look at the note card in her hand. "We've decided the senior development position requires additional experience. Corinne will be taking the assistant coordinator role instead." She smiled thinly. "Consider it a reality check." My certificate suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The room blurred as blood rushed to my face. Garrison, her father and our CEO, wasn't even present for this ambush. Thea, my closest colleague, reached for my arm, but I stepped away. I wouldn't break. Not here. The champagne and cake will still be served in the break room. Petra added, checking her watch. "I have calls with our European partners in 15 minutes, so unfortunately I'll miss the celebration." Our European partners. My European partners. The ones I'd spent 6 months cultivating relationships with for our biggest international launch yet. As people awkwardly filed out, their congratulations transformed to whispered sympathies. I felt something shift inside me. The floor beneath my sensible shoes seemed to tilt as a clarity I'd never experienced before washed over me. I didn't know it yet, but that moment of humiliation would be the catalyst for something Petra never anticipated. Because while she had her father's name, I had something far more valuable, and she had just made the mistake of taking everything I had nothing left to lose. If you're enjoying this story of workplace betrayal and what might happen next, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Comment below if you've ever had someone try to take credit for your hard work. I read every comment and would love to hear your experiences. My name is Corinne Ashcroft. Before that day, colleagues described me as methodical, dedicated, and perhaps too accommodating. I grew up in a small coastal town where my father ran the local hardware store, teaching me the value of knowing your inventory better than your competition. My mother, a high school mathematics teacher, instilled in me the importance of double-checking every calculation. Neither prepared me for corporate politics. I joined Garrison's company 3 years ago after completing my master's in international business development. The company was struggling to expand beyond domestic markets, and my thesis on penetrating reluctant international economies caught their attention. I wasn't the obvious choice. I lacked the pedigree of other candidates, but my research was solid, and I was hungry to prove myself. For my first project, I was assigned to analyze why our products weren't selling in Australia. After 3 weeks of research, I discovered our shipping partner was holding inventory in non-climate controlled warehouses, causing product degradation before items even reached shelves. My solution saved the company $3.4 million in my first quarter. I continued to quietly solve problems nobody else could see. When our Asian market expansion stalled, I identified cultural customizations that revitalized sales. When tariffs threatened our Canadian distribution, I found a legal workaround that preserved our margins. Through it all, I remained in my mid-level position while watching less qualified people climb past me. People like Derek, who played golf with Garrison. People like Weston, who attended the same university as the board chairman. People like Petra, who spent her first year observing departments before landing a director title. I told myself merit would eventually win. I was naive. The morning before my promotion turned demotion, I had received an email from our largest potential European partner. "Your analysis of our market is the most comprehensive we've seen," their CEO wrote. "We look forward to tomorrow's presentation and finalizing our partnership." That partnership would be worth $42 million in first-year revenue alone. I had spent months identifying a legislative loophole that would give us significant tax advantages if we moved quickly, before pending regulations closed it. The information wasn't public knowledge, but my research with regulatory insiders had uncovered it. This was my masterpiece. And now, apparently, it was Petra's. After the demotion announcement, I walked directly to HR. Everett, the human resources director, welcomed me with practiced neutrality. His office smelled of coffee and printer toner. "Corinne, what can I do for you today?" he asked, despite surely knowing why I was there. "I'd like to understand the rationale behind my position change," I said, keeping my voice steady, particularly since it contradicts what Garrison told me yesterday. Everett shifted in his seat. Position adjustments happen for various reasons. "Everett," I interrupted, "we've known each other for 3 years. Let's not pretend this is normal procedure." He sighed, shoulders dropping. "Look, I understand your frustration, but her father owns the company. What do you expect us to do?" The fluorescent light above flickered, casting momentary shadows across his apologetic expression. "So merit means nothing here?" I asked. "Merit means something," he replied carefully, "but family means more." I left his office with my answer. In the elevator down to my floor, my phone buzzed with a message from Thea. "Petra just emailed everyone. She's taking over your European presentation tomorrow. Says she's handling it personally now." The elevator doors opened, but I couldn't move. The European presentation contained my research about the regulatory loophole, the key to our competitive advantage. If presented correctly, it would cement our position in 5 countries. If handled poorly, my phone buzzed again. "Thea, she's in your files right now, copying everything." Of course she was. Why steal half a victory when you could take it all? I returned to my desk, soon to be relocated to some distant corner, and found Petra sitting in my chair, scrolling through my computer. She didn't even look up. "I need your presentation notes for tomorrow," she said. "They're all in the shared folder," I replied. "Everything's there." This wasn't entirely true. My latest research, the critical updates about the regulatory timeline, was saved in my personal notes. I hadn't transferred them to the shared drive yet, planning to incorporate them during my final presentation review. "Perfect," Petra said, standing up. "I'll take it from here. You should start moving your things to the assistant coordinator desk." She finally looked at me, her expression almost curious. "You know, if you had networked more, this might not have happened. All work and no play makes for replaceable employees." As she walked away, my desk phone rang. It was Veronica, our contact at the European Regulatory Commission. "Corinne, I just confirmed that information you asked about. The vote is definitely happening next week, not next month like everyone thinks. If your company wants to utilize the existing framework, you'll need to file within 10 days. 10 days. Not the 6 months everyone in the industry believed we had. Thank you, Veronica. This is incredibly valuable. I'm only telling you because you've done your homework better than anyone else approaching our markets. Will I see you at tomorrow's presentation?" I paused, my hand tightening around the receiver. "I'll be there, but there's been a change in presenters." After hanging up, I sat motionless, considering my options. The correct thing would be to immediately update the shared folder with this critical information, to ensure the company had every advantage. But as I watched Petra showing off my presentation to admirers across the office, another path crystallized in my mind. I could just do nothing. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I had never deliberately withheld information before, but I wasn't being asked to present. I was being demoted. My work was being stolen. What did I owe them? That evening, I stayed late, packing my desk items while everyone else left. The office grew quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. In the corner conference room, I could see Petra still practicing my presentation. She was stumbling over the technical details, but her confidence never wavered. She truly believed that confidence alone could substitute for competence. As I watched her, my phone rang. It was Garrison himself. "Corinne," he said without preamble, "I just heard about today's announcement. I want you to know I was in board meetings all day." "Are you saying you didn't approve the change?" I asked, heart suddenly racing. A long pause followed. "I'm saying Petra has strong instincts about organizational needs. The board feels she's ready for more responsibility. And my work, my projects, will be appropriately managed," he finished smoothly. "This isn't a reflection on your performance. Sometimes we need to make room for emerging talent." Emerging talent. His daughter was 31, 4 years older than me. I understand, I said, though I didn't. Excellent. I knew you would. That's why we value you. Just not enough to honor promises. Not enough to protect my career. As I hung up, Petra emerged from the conference room. Seeing me still there, she approached. Still working? That's dedication, she said with artificial brightness. Quick question about slide 32, the regulatory timeline. It mentions pending legislation but doesn't give specifics. Is there a supplemental document? This was my moment. The information from Veronica changed everything about our market entry strategy. Without it, any presentation would be fundamentally flawed. I looked at Petra, really looked at her. Behind her confidence, I saw anxiety. She knew she was presenting work she didn't understand, but she also believed her name would protect her from consequences. Everything important is in the main deck, I said. The legislation isn't expected to impact near-term plans. The lie tasted strange on my tongue, not bitter as I might have expected, but almost sweet. Perfect, she said, visibly relieved. That's what I thought. She turned to leave, then stopped. You should really be grateful. Assistant coordinator is more your speed. The senior role requires someone who can see the big picture, not just crunch numbers. After she left, I sat alone in the darkening office. Tomorrow, Petra would present my work to our European partners, our executive team, and the investment committee. She would present outdated regulatory information. She would miss the urgency of our market entry timeline. She would, with absolute confidence, lead the company toward a massive strategic error, and I would watch it happen. The next morning, I arrived early and chose a seat in the back of the main conference room. Executives began filing in at 8:45. Our European partners arrived at 8:55, led by Henrik, their silver-haired CEO. The investment committee, H1, 5 serious individuals with the power to approve or deny the $42 million expansion, took their seats at 9 precisely. At 9:10, Petra entered, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She distributed handouts, my handouts, created 3 weeks ago. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice steady. I'm Petra Garrison, Strategic Initiatives Director, and I'm excited to present our European market entry strategy. For the next hour, I watched her deliver my work as her own. She handled the basic material well enough, the market size analysis, the competitive landscape, our product differentiation. The audience seemed engaged, nodding at appropriate moments. Then came the questions. These projections assume current regulatory conditions, said Elise from the investment committee. What contingencies do we have if regulations change? Petra smiled confidently. Our analysis indicates regulatory stability in this sector. The European Parliament isn't considering relevant changes for at least 6 months, giving us ample implementation time. Henrik frowned, exchanging glances with his legal counsel. Are you certain? We've heard rumors of accelerated timelines. Just rumors, Petra assured him. Our sources are quite reliable. My stomach tightened. Veronica wasn't a rumor. She was the assistant director of the Regulatory Commission. The questions grew more technical. With each one, Petra's answers became vaguer, her confident smile more forced. When asked about tariff implications for specific product components, she gave an answer so incorrect I had to stifle a gasp. Then Henrik asked the question I'd been dreading and anticipating. What's your position on next week's parliamentary vote regarding cross-border digital commerce regulations? Petra blinked rapidly. Next week? Our intelligence suggests that vote is scheduled for next quarter. It was moved up, Henrik said flatly. It's on the official parliamentary calendar. The outcome will fundamentally reshape market entry requirements. Petra faltered for the first time. We believe it won't significantly impact our projections. The room went silent. Henrik leaned back, no longer taking notes. The investment committee members exchanged concerned glances. Garrison, sitting at the head of the table, frowned deeply. Perhaps, Henrik said carefully, we should reconvene after your team has had time to assess the updated regulatory timeline. The meeting ended with uncomfortable handshakes and non-committal pleasantries. As everyone filed out, Garrison pulled Petra aside, his expression thunderous. Neither looked in my direction. I returned to my new desk in the corner, smaller, facing a wall, a physical manifestation of my demotion. By lunchtime, whispers spread that the European partners were reconsidering. By mid-afternoon, the investment committee had postponed their decision. At the 30, Garrison burst from his office, face flushed, phone clutched in his hand. Petra followed, her earlier confidence replaced by panic. My phone began to buzz. First Thea, then Everett from HR, then the head of legal. By the time I checked my notifications 4 hours later, I had 96 missed calls and messages. The company was in crisis mode. The European partners had not only delayed but were reconsidering whether we were competent enough to work with. The investment committee was questioning the entire expansion strategy, and everyone was looking for answers about how we could have missed something so fundamental. No one had yet realized that I might have those answers, but they would, soon, and when they did, everything would change. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone continued buzzing with messages I refused to answer. Around midnight, I finally silenced it and stared at my ceiling, thoughts racing. The company was in full meltdown, and I was the only one who knew exactly why. Morning arrived with a company-wide email announcing an emergency board meeting at 9 a.m. My name wasn't on the attendee list. No surprise there. Assistant coordinators didn't attend board meetings. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple charcoal dress I'd worn on my first day at the company. As I applied my lipstick, my phone rang. Thea. Corinne, where are you? Everyone's looking for you. Garrison is having a complete breakdown, and Petra locked herself in the bathroom an hour ago. I'll be in shortly, I replied calmly. They've called an emergency board meeting. Henrik and the European team are threatening to walk completely. Did you know about the vote next week? I paused, lipstick midair. Yes, I did. Silence stretched between us. Corinne, Thea's voice dropped to a whisper. Did you deliberately not tell Petra? I set down my lipstick. I'm on my way. We'll talk when I get there. The office was chaos when I arrived. People hurried between conference rooms, expressions tense. Everett from HR spotted me immediately. Thank God, he said, rushing over. The board wants to see you. Now. He led me to the executive floor, a place I'd visited rarely, and never with positive outcomes. Outside the boardroom, Garrison paced, while 2 board members spoke in hushed tones. Petra was nowhere to be seen. When Garrison noticed me, he stopped pacing. His face, normally confident and commanding, looked haggard. Corinne, he said, my name sounding strange in his mouth. We need to talk about the European presentation. Before I could respond, the boardroom door opened. Avery, the board chairman, gestured me inside. Ms. Ashcroft, please join us. The long boardroom table was filled with grave faces. Henrik and 2 members of his team sat on one side. The investment committee occupied the other. At the head sat Avery, his silver hair perfectly arranged despite the crisis atmosphere. Ms. Ashcroft, Avery began as I took the single empty chair. We understand you were originally assigned to the European market expansion project. That's correct, I replied, and you were removed from the project yesterday, immediately following your position adjustment. I nodded. Yet you attended yesterday's presentation. Why? All eyes turned to me. I could feel Garrison's gaze burning into my back from where he stood by the door. I wanted to support the company's interests, I said carefully. I've invested significant time in this project and care about its success. Henrik leaned forward. Ms. Ashcroft, were you aware of next week's parliamentary vote on cross-border commerce regulations? The room held its breath. This was the moment that would define everything that followed. Yes, I answered simply. I received confirmation of the accelerated timeline the day before yesterday. The room erupted with voices. Avery raised his hand for silence. And why wasn't this information included in yesterday's presentation? He asked. I met his gaze directly. I was removed from the project before I could update the shared files. My notes about the regulatory changes were in my personal research documents. Personal research? Garrison interrupted from behind me. All company work should be on the shared drive. I turned slightly to face him. The verification came through shortly before my demotion. I hadn't yet transferred my notes. I paused, and afterward, no one asked me for any updates. The silence that followed was deafening. Do you have this information with you now? Henrik asked. I reached into my bag and removed a folder. I do, along with a complete analysis of how we can still enter the market before the new regulations, if we move very quickly. For the next 2 hours, I walked the room through everything I knew, the specific regulations changing, the timeline for implementation, the narrow window we had to establish market presence under the existing framework, the exact steps required to meet the deadline. Henrik's team took extensive notes. The investment committee members exchanged meaningful glances. Avery watched me with growing interest. When I finished, Avery spoke first. It seems we have a significant opportunity if we can move fast enough. We can, I said confidently, but decisions would need to be made immediately. And who would lead this accelerated timeline? Henrik asked. Before Avery could respond, Garrison stepped forward. Naturally, Petra would. Ms. Ashcroft, Avery interrupted. Would you be capable of leading this initiative? The question hung in the air. Through the glass walls, I could see Petra had finally emerged, watching the meeting from a distance, her expression unreadable. Yes, I said. I would. Avery nodded. The board needs to discuss next steps privately. Ms. Ashcroft, please wait outside. In the hallway, Garrison cornered me immediately. What game are you playing? He hissed, keeping his voice low enough that others couldn't hear. No game, I replied calmly. Just sharing what I know. You deliberately withheld critical information. I was demoted and removed from the project, I said. Nobody asked me if I had updates. His face reddened. You should have volunteered it. Like Petra volunteered to take my promotion? I asked quietly. Before he could respond, Petra approached. Her designer outfit from yesterday replaced by something more subdued. Her eyes were rimmed with red. They're going to blame me for everything, she said to her father, ignoring my presence. The board is furious. No one's blaming anyone, Garrison said, though his tone lacked conviction. Petra finally acknowledged me with a glare. You set me up. I did no such thing, I replied. I simply didn't correct your mistakes. You knew the presentation was incomplete. So did you, I countered. But you presented it as definitive, anyway. Before she could respond, the boardroom door opened. Avery emerged, followed by Henrik and the others. We've reached several decisions, Avery announced to our small group in the hallway. First, we're proceeding with the European expansion on the accelerated timeline Ms. Ashcroft outlined. Henrik nodded in agreement, with the understanding that we must file all necessary documentation before next week's vote. Second, Avery continued, Ms. Ashcroft will lead the project as Senior Development Manager, effective immediately. Garrison started to object, but Avery held up his hand. This is not negotiable, Garrison. The board has decided. And what about my daughter? Garrison demanded. Avery's expression hardened slightly. Petra will transition to our facilities management team. Her people skills will be valuable there. Facilities management, overseeing office space and maintenance. The corporate equivalent of being sent to Siberia, Petra gasped. That's janitorial work. It's administrative, Avery corrected coldly. And perhaps educational. My father won't allow this, she said, her voice rising. He's the CEO, who serves at the pleasure of the board, Avery reminded her. A board currently questioning his judgment in personnel matters. The threat hung in the air. Garrison's face paled. Now, Avery continued, Ms. Ashcroft has work to do if we're going to meet these deadlines. I suggest we all support her efforts. Within an hour, I was moved back to my original desk and given access to all necessary resources. Thea was assigned as my project deputy. By lunchtime, we had a preliminary timeline drafted for the accelerated market entry. When I finally checked my personal email that evening, I found a message from Veronica at the European Regulatory Commission. Heard through the grapevine that your presentation had some excitement yesterday. If you're still leading the project, I'd be happy to provide any clarification needed before the vote. I smiled as I typed my response. Thank you, Veronica. I am indeed leading the project now, and I would appreciate your insights. The next week passed in a blur of activity. 14-hour days, constant calls with Henrik's team, meticulous preparation of regulatory filings. Through it all, Petra remained conspicuously absent, while Garrison kept his distance, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary. On Thursday, 2 days before the parliamentary vote, Henrik visited our offices to review final documentation. "I'm impressed," he said as we concluded our meeting. "Your team has accomplished in days what most companies couldn't do in months." "Thank you," I replied. "We're motivated to get this right." He studied me thoughtfully. "You know, when Petra gave that presentation, I nearly walked away completely. Her confidence, despite such obvious knowledge gaps, was alarming. She had limited time with the material," I offered diplomatically. Henrik smiled slightly. "You're being gracious. Unnecessary, but appreciated." He gathered his papers. "By the way, there's an opening in our executive team for someone who understands both markets. Once this partnership is established, I'd be interested in discussing possibilities with you." The offer caught me off guard. I'm committed to seeing this project succeed. Of course. Just something to consider for the future. After he left, I sat at my desk, turning his words over in my mind. A week ago, I'd been demoted to a position with no future. Now I was fielding executive offers from international partners, all because I had chosen not to speak up. The thought was still with me that evening as I worked late, finalizing documents. Most of the office had emptied when I heard footsteps approaching. Petra stood before my desk, looking nothing like the confident woman who had demoted me. Her designer clothes had been replaced by business casual, her makeup subdued. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've been assigned to the Belgrade office," she said without preamble. "Facilities management for our Eastern European archive facility." Belgrade, the company's most remote location, housing decades of paper records nobody ever accessed. "I see," I said, unsure how to respond. "My father can't protect me anymore. The board has him on probation too." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "You won." The statement surprised me. This wasn't about winning. "Wasn't it?" she challenged. "You could have told me about the regulatory vote. You chose not to." I considered denying it, then decided on honesty. "Yes, I chose not to." "Why?" "Because you took something you didn't earn," I said simply, "and you needed to understand the consequences." She was quiet for a moment. "I've never failed at anything before." "That's the problem," I replied. "Failure is how we learn." "And what am I supposed to learn from being exiled to Belgrade?" I leaned forward slightly. "That name's open doors, but knowledge keeps them open." She nodded slowly, then stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the demotion. It wasn't personal. It felt personal." "It wasn't," she insisted. "It was just convenient. I needed a senior role, and yours was available." As she walked away, I realized something important. To Petra, people like me were interchangeable, our careers mere stepping stones for her advancement. We weren't rivals in her mind. We were props. That understanding changed everything. The next morning, I received an email from Avery requesting a private meeting that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, I was surprised to find Henrik there as well. "Corinne," Avery began, "we want to discuss your future with the company." My stomach tightened. "My future?" "Henrik has made a compelling case for creating a new position, International Partnerships Director. We've agreed this role should be yours, with appropriate compensation and authority." Henrik smiled. "As I mentioned yesterday, your understanding of both markets is exceptional." "This is unexpected," I managed. "Is it?" Avery asked. "You single-handedly saved our most important partnership and prevented a potentially disastrous market entry mistake." "What about Garrison?" I asked carefully. "As CEO, wouldn't he need to approve this?" Avery and Henrik exchanged glances. "There have been additional developments," Avery said. "Garrison has decided to take an extended sabbatical, effective immediately. The board will be announcing an interim CEO later today." The news stunned me. "I see. Do you accept the position?" Henrik asked. "Yes," I said. "Of course." After they outlined the details, I returned to my desk in a daze. Thea rushed over immediately. Is it true? About Garrison? I nodded. How did you hear already? The board memo just went out company-wide. Rumor is he's not coming back. She lowered her voice. They say the European crisis was just the final straw. Apparently, the board has been concerned about his management decisions for months, especially around his daughter. As word spread throughout the office, I received a steady stream of congratulatory messages about my new role. By evening, my promotion was official. My name added to the executive leadership page on the company website. 1 week after Petra had demoted me, I had an office twice the size of hers, a team of 12 reporting to me, and direct access to the board of directors. I had won, but strangely, victory felt hollow. That night, as I packed up to leave, I found a small box on my desk with a note from Thea. For your new office, you earned this. Inside was a simple nameplate, Corinne Ashcroft, International Partnerships Director. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters, thinking about everything that had happened. I hadn't plotted elaborate revenge. I hadn't spread rumors or manufactured evidence. I had simply stepped aside and let Petra fail on her own merits. And in doing so, I had revealed something far more powerful than any scheme could have accomplished: the truth about her capabilities. The ultimate revenge wasn't taking her down. It was rising above while she fell under the weight of her own incompetence. 2 days later, we received confirmation that our European market entry had been approved before the regulatory changes. The partnership with Henrik's company was formalized. The $42 million expansion was proceeding. As I stood at the window of my new office, watching the sunset paint the city skyline, my phone buzzed with a text from an international number I didn't recognize. It's freezing in Belgrade. The archive facility is as exciting as it sounds. Congratulations on your promotion. I underestimated you. Won't happen again. P. I didn't reply. Some lessons are best learned in silence. 6 months later, our European expansion was exceeding all projections. Garrison's sabbatical had become permanent retirement. Petra remained in Belgrade, though rumors suggested she was looking for positions at other companies. And me? I was thriving in my new role, respected by the board and my team alike. The fear that had driven me to work twice as hard as everyone else had transformed into confidence that allowed me to work twice as smart. When Henrik visited for our quarterly review, he commented on the change. You seem different, Corinne, more assured. I learned something important, I told him. True power isn't in titles or family connections. It's in knowing your value and being willing to stand in it, even when others try to diminish you. He smiled. And in knowing when to speak up and when to remain silent. Especially that, I agreed. People often think revenge requires elaborate schemes or public humiliation, but I discovered its purest form, creating success so undeniable that those who wronged you must acknowledge it, even from their exile in Belgrade. The most devastating response to someone who tries to erase you isn't fighting back. It's becoming impossible to ignore. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real workplace dramas that will keep you coming back for more. Have you ever been underestimated and then proven someone wrong? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one and would love to hear how you handled it. Adjust your attitude. Everyone's working hard here. My manager Deirdre didn't even look up from her monitor as she dismissed 6 months of my 70-hour work weeks with a flick of her wrist. The half-eaten protein bar on her desk had more of her attention than my quiet plea for help. My vision tunneled as I stood in her office doorway, gripping the stack of reports I'd stayed until 2 a.m. to finish. The spreadsheets held numbers that tracked everyone else's success but somehow never accounted for the cost to me. My voice had trembled when I'd finally worked up the courage to tell her I was drowning. I'm concerned about burnout. I haven't had a weekend off since February. Her 5-word response hung between us as my hope collapsed. I nodded, my expression carefully neutral, and turned to leave. What Deirdre didn't know was that her casual dismissal had just ignited something in me. Not a breakdown, a breakthrough. By Monday morning, I would hand her a note that would change everything. Before I tell you what was in that note, I want to be clear. This isn't just a story about workplace revenge. It's about reclaiming your worth when others have decided you don't matter. I've noticed many of you messaging about similar experiences, feeling trapped in toxic work environments. If that's you, keep watching until the end, because what I did next might change how you view your own situation. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. I share these raw experiences because none of us should suffer alone in silence. My name is Avery Lockhart. At 28, I was the senior data analyst at a mid-sized tech consulting firm, the kind of person who color-coded her calendar and always arrived 15 minutes early. My colleagues called me the human calculator because I could spot patterns and numbers that others missed. That attention to detail made me valuable to the company, and eventually dangerous to them too. I grew up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Watching her exhaustion taught me that hard work was supposed to lead somewhere better. She'd always tell me, "Avery, your mind is your ticket out." So I studied relentlessly, earned scholarships, and landed this corporate job that was supposed to be my arrival. The glass office building with its sleek elevators and complimentary coffee bar seemed worlds away from our cramped apartment where I'd done homework by flashlight when the electricity got cut off. When I started at Crestview Consulting, the promise was clear. Work hard for 2 years, prove yourself, and doors would open. The reality looked different by year 3. My salary had increased by just 4% annually, while my responsibilities had tripled. I now managed projects that previously required 3 people. My desk had become an island I rarely left. My lunch breaks sacrificed to urgent client requests. The morning of that fateful Friday, I'd received another email. "Avery, Marcus left for that startup in Seattle. Can you absorb his central bank analytics project? Just temporary. Thanks." That was the 4th temporary project in 3 months. Each previous colleague who left was never replaced. Their work simply became mine. I'd prepared for my conversation with Deirdre carefully. I'd practiced a professional tone, brought documented evidence of my expanded workload, and researched solutions to propose. But none of that mattered when she couldn't even spare 30 seconds to look me in the eye. After her dismissal, I returned to my desk in a daze. My computer screen blurred as tears threatened. A notification popped up, another late-night call scheduled for Sunday. My pulse quickened as anger replaced hurt. I looked around at my remaining teammates. Eliza, dark circles under her eyes, was quietly weeping in the conference room while still on a client call, muted. Oliver, who'd missed his daughter's recital 3 times last month, was washing down anxiety medication with energy drinks. We weren't employees to Deirdre and the leadership team. We were resources to be depleted. I opened a blank document and began to type. If Deirdre only respected data, then data she would get. That weekend, instead of collapsing into recovery, sleep, or frantically prepping for Monday deliverables, I transformed my dining table into an investigation headquarters. I pulled out my laptop and began extracting information from our project management system. The company had recently implemented tracking software that logged everyone's active hours, keystrokes, and outputs. It was meant to monitor productivity, but it had unintentionally created a perfect record of our overwork. I downloaded reports showing how team members worked through lunch breaks and logged back in from home until midnight. Next, I created spreadsheets comparing our team's output before and after the increased workloads. The pattern was clear. Productivity spiked briefly when people took on more projects, then steadily declined as burnout set in. Tasks that once took 4 hours now required 7. Error rates increased by 38% after the 50-hour mark each week. I cross-referenced this with our retention data. In 18 months, we'd lost 11 key team members. The cost of recruiting and training their replacements exceeded $800,000, a figure the finance department had buried across multiple budget lines. The medical leave records told another story. Stress-related absences had increased 215% in our department compared to the company average. 3 employees were on anxiety medication who hadn't been before. But numbers alone wouldn't capture the human toll. I created an anonymous survey using a private account and sent it to current and former teammates. Would you describe yourself as burned out? How has your physical health changed since joining the team? Have you sought medical help for work-related stress? What feedback have you received when raising concerns? The responses poured in faster than I expected. People had been waiting for someone to ask. I developed stress, induced eczema that covered my arms. I missed my grandfather's funeral to finish a presentation that no one ended up reviewing. My marriage is failing because I'm too exhausted to be present when I'm home. My manager told me to toughen up when I asked for help. Their words fueled my determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. By Sunday afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive 20-page report. I titled it, "The Hidden Costs of Burnout: A Business Case for Sustainable Workloads." The document detailed how our current working conditions were actually undermining the company's financial performance and strategic goals. I included research from Harvard Business Review and Mayo Clinic about how burnout decreased innovation, the very thing our company claimed to offer clients. I added case studies of companies that had improved their bottom line by addressing employee well-being. The final section presented 3 detailed implementation plans for workload balancing, complete with cost-benefit analyses. Each option would save the company money while improving output quality and retention. As I finished formatting the report at 2 a.m. Sunday night, I felt a strange calm replace my anger. This wasn't a complaint. It was a solution. And it spoke the only language that seemed to matter to leadership: profit. I printed the report on high-quality paper and placed it in a professional binder. Then I wrote a simple note to attach to the front. "Deirdre, as requested, I've adjusted my attitude. This is my analysis of our current productivity challenges and proposed solutions. I'm available to discuss implementation at your convenience. Avery." Monday morning arrived. I dressed with particular care in a deep blue dress that always gave me confidence. I arrived 30 minutes early to center myself. When Deirdre walked in at 8:15, I waited until she settled at her desk before approaching her office. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. She looked surprised to see me. "Avery, what do you need?" I placed the binder on her desk. "I wanted to share this with you. It's important." "What's this?" She glanced at the cover note. "It's my adjusted attitude," I replied. "I think you'll find it illuminating." Her eyebrows rose slightly at my direct tone, something new from her usually accommodating analyst. "I'll take a look when I have time," she said, already dismissing me by turning to her email. "Of course, I'll be at my desk." I walked out, my heart pounding but my steps measured. I returned to my work, focusing on the immediate tasks due that morning. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "What did you give her? She's been reading something for 20 minutes and looks like she saw a ghost." I didn't respond. The document would speak for itself. At 10:30, Deirdre emerged from her office and walked directly to our director's suite without acknowledging anyone. By 11:15, the executive assistant was scheduling an urgent leadership meeting for 1 p.m. At 12:03, my desk phone rang. "Avery, can you join us in the main conference room? Bring your laptop." Deirdre's voice sounded strained. "When would you like me there?" I asked calmly. "Now, please." The conference room held our entire leadership team, 7 people who normally were too busy to be in the same room together. The chief operating officer, Helena Walsh, sat at the head of the table. I'd only seen her twice in 3 years. Deirdre gestured to an empty seat. "Avery, we'd like you to walk us through your report." I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector, and stood. For the next 40 minutes, I presented the data I'd gathered, keeping my tone professional and focused on business impact rather than emotional appeals. When I finished, the room was silent until Helena spoke. "How long did this analysis take you?" "I compiled it over the weekend," I replied. She exchanged glances with the CFO. "You created this entire report in 2 days?" "Yes. I had been tracking much of this data already as part of my regular project analytics." "And these implementation plans, you developed these yourself?" "I did. Option 2 would be my recommendation, based on our current resource constraints." Helena closed her copy of the report. "Deirdre, would you excuse us? I'd like to speak with Avery privately." My manager's face tightened, but she nodded and left the room. The other executives followed, leaving me alone with the COO. "Sit down, Avery," Helena said, her tone softer now. "I want to be very clear about something. This report is exceptional work, but I'm disturbed by what it reveals about our operations." I maintained eye contact. I understand. No, I don't think you do. She leaned forward. I've been COO for 5 years. This is the first time someone has brought this level of analysis about our internal operations to my attention. That's a failure of leadership, mine included. My careful composure nearly cracked at her unexpected accountability. The question now, she continued, is what we do about it, both the workload issues and the fact that we needed an overworked analyst to point them out to us. I took a deep breath. May I speak candidly? Please do. Your management chain has been incentivized to maximize output while minimizing headcount. Quarterly bonuses are tied to these metrics with no counterbalance for sustainability or quality. People are rewarded for burning out their teams, not developing them. Helena didn't interrupt, so I continued. Meanwhile, your most talented people are leaving. Those who stay are working at diminished capacity due to exhaustion. Client deliverables are increasingly late or flawed. This isn't just a human resources problem. It's undermining your business model. Helena was silent for a long moment. You've clearly thought about this deeply. What would you do if you were in my position? The question caught me off guard. I had prepared for resistance, not invitation. I would create a task force with representatives from each level of the organization, not just management. I would conduct a thorough workload audit across all departments. I would temporarily freeze new client acquisitions until staffing aligns with capacity, and I would immediately revisit how performance is measured and rewarded. Helena nodded slowly. Would you be willing to lead this initiative, working directly with me? Now I was truly stunned. What exactly are you proposing? A new position, workplace sustainability strategist, reporting to me. Your focus would be implementing the recommendations in this report and developing long-term solutions. It would come with appropriate compensation adjustments, of course. My mind raced. This wasn't at all what I had expected when I walked into Deirdre's office with my report. I had been prepared to be ignored, dismissed again, or even to find myself job hunting. I would need certain guarantees, I said carefully. Complete access to company data, authority to interview staff confidentially, a budget for implementation, and no retaliation against those who speak honestly about these issues. Helena actually smiled. You're negotiating with the COO. Yes, I am. She extended her hand. Draft a formal proposal with your requirements by Wednesday. I'll have an offer letter to you by Friday. As we shook hands, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The document I'd created as my response to being dismissed had opened a door I hadn't even known existed. When I returned to my desk, my teammates looked at me questioningly. News had already spread that I'd been in a closed-door meeting with the leadership team. What happened? Eliza whispered. I wasn't yet ready to share the details. They're reviewing some recommendations I made, I said simply. By Tuesday morning, everything had changed. An all-staff email announced an immediate review of workloads and the temporary redistribution of critical projects. External consultants would be brought in to support ongoing client work. A company-wide meeting was scheduled to address burnout concerns directly. Deirdre avoided eye contact when she passed my desk. At 2 p.m., she finally approached me. Helena would like you to move your workspace to the executive floor, effective immediately. Her voice was flat, her expression unreadable. Thank you for letting me know, I replied neutrally. As I packed my belongings, I felt no triumph over Deirdre's obvious discomfort. This had never been about humiliating her. It was about creating change in a system that was hurting people, including her. By Wednesday, I had a new workspace on the executive floor, a glass-walled office that made me feel simultaneously exposed and isolated. My former teammates sent curious messages, wondering what exactly had happened. Most assumed I'd been promoted for conventional reasons, unaware of the report that had catalyzed everything. I spent my first days in the new role meeting individually with department heads. Some were openly hostile, viewing me as a threat to their authority. Others seemed relieved, as if they'd been waiting for someone to acknowledge the unsustainable pace. The most difficult conversation was with Jamal, the finance director who had designed the incentive structure that rewarded managers for understaffing their teams. This system has delivered 14 consecutive quarters of growth, he argued, leaning back in his chair with practiced confidence. Now we're supposed to dismantle it because some people can't handle the pressure? I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd prepared. These numbers tell a different story. Client retention has dropped 23% in the last 3 quarters. The average project now requires 2 rounds of revisions instead of 1. And recruitment costs have doubled as our reputation spreads. He waved dismissively. Temporary market conditions, it'll stabilize. Jamal, 15 exit interviews specifically mentioned unsustainable workloads as the primary reason for leaving. That's not the market. That's our internal culture. So what's your solution? Hire more people and watch our margins disappear? His tone was challenging, but I detected something underneath. Fear, perhaps. Actually, no. My proposal maintains our current headcount but redistributes workloads based on complexity rather than volume. It implements cross-training to eliminate single points of failure. And it revises the bonus structure to reward quality and innovation, not just output. He studied me with new interest. You're not just here to advocate for shorter hours. I'm here to make this company sustainable financially and humanly. Those aren't opposing goals. By Friday afternoon, Helena had approved my formal proposal. I would lead a 6-month initiative with 3 phases: immediate workload, rebalancing, systems redesign, and culture transformation. I'd have a small team reporting directly to me and budget authority for necessary resources. The following Monday, I presented the initiative to the entire company in a town hall meeting. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that showed equal parts hope and skepticism, I felt the weight of responsibility. For too long, we've operated under the myth that burnout is the price of success, I began. The data tells us the opposite is true. Sustainable workloads produce better results. Respected employees deliver superior value. This initiative isn't about working less, it's about working better. From the back of the room, I spotted Deirdre, arms crossed, expression guarded. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away. After the presentation, as people filed out, Eliza approached me. Is this for real? Or just corporate theater before things go back to normal? It's real, I assured her, but it will take everyone's participation to make it work. She hesitated. Deirdre's been telling people you exaggerated everything to get promoted. I wasn't surprised. The data speaks for itself. That's why I'm forming an advisory committee with representatives from every level. Would you be interested? Her eyes widened. Absolutely. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. I conducted department audits, interviewed team members, and mapped workflows. The picture that emerged confirmed my initial findings. Our burnout wasn't just severe, it was systemic. My first official act was implementing Focus Fridays. No meetings, no new assignments, dedicated time for deep work and project completion. It was a simple change that provided immediate relief while we tackled the larger issues. The resistance began subtly, meetings scheduled despite the Friday policy, passive-aggressive emails questioning the initiative's value, whispers that I had manipulated my way into a made-up position. Deirdre became the unofficial leader of this resistance. She continued piling work on her remaining team members, now with the added instruction to document productivity impacts of my initiatives. I had anticipated this and built in accountability mechanisms. Every team member now submitted weekly anonymous feedback through a system only I could access. The data quickly highlighted which managers were undermining the changes. Rather than confronting Deirdre directly, I scheduled a leadership review where each department's metrics were displayed side by side: current productivity, error rates, and employee feedback. Her department's numbers stood out starkly against teams that had embraced the changes. As you can see, I noted neutrally, departments implementing the new workload standards are seeing increased output quality and decreased revision requests. Teams still operating under the previous model continue to show declining performance. Helena zeroed in immediately. Deirdre, what's your timeline for implementing these standards in your group? Cornered by data rather than accusations, Deirdre had no choice. We'll begin next week, she conceded tightly. After the meeting, she cornered me in the hallway. Clever move, but don't think I don't see what you're doing. I kept my voice level. What am I doing, Deirdre? Using these so-called reforms to settle a personal score. There's nothing personal about data. Your team is suffering, your deliverables are declining in quality, and your turnover is the highest in the company. That's not a score, it's a business problem. She stepped closer. You know what your problem is, Avery? You never learned how business really works. Success requires sacrifice. Whose sacrifice, though? Because it hasn't been yours. Her face flushed. I have given everything to this company. Except compassion, I replied quietly. And that's cost us more than you realize. As I walked away, I realized Deirdre wasn't my enemy. She was a product of the same system that had nearly broken me. The difference was that I could see it clearly now, while she was still trapped in its logic. By the third month of the initiative, measurable changes were appearing. Client satisfaction scores increased 18%. Project completion times decreased, despite fewer overtime hours. Sick days dropped by 27%. Most tellingly, people began eating lunch away from their desks. Conversations in the break room lasted longer than 60 seconds. Laughter occasionally echoed down hallways that had previously held only the sound of urgent typing. Not everyone was happy. 2 senior managers resigned rather than adapt to the new performance metrics. Several clients who had grown accustomed to around-the-clock availability threatened to leave until they saw the improved quality of our deliverables. The most difficult phase was tackling the company's underlying cultural issues. Anonymous surveys revealed patterns of subtle intimidation, praise for unhealthy work habits, and widespread fear of appearing uncommitted by maintaining boundaries. To address this, I created small, cross-functional discussion groups where people could share experiences without their direct managers present. The stories that emerged were both heartbreaking and illuminating. My daughter had pneumonia, and I still called into 3 meetings from her hospital room. I was told my performance review would suffer if I didn't respond to emails on vacation. My manager regularly texted at 11 p.m., expecting immediate responses. We documented these patterns and developed new company norms, explicit expectations about response times, clear boundaries for after-hours contact, and revised evaluation criteria that measured outcomes rather than hours visible. 4 months into the initiative, Helena called me into her office. I found her reviewing the quarterly financial reports. Client retention is up 9%, she noted, and we've reduced contractor costs by almost half. The team has done incredible work, I acknowledged. It's more than that. She turned her monitor so I could see the screen. Applications to open positions have tripled. Our reputation in the industry is changing. I felt a rush of validation. That was faster than I projected. There's something else we need to discuss. Helena's expression turned serious. Deirdre has requested a transfer to our West Coast office. This was unexpected. When? Immediately. She feels her leadership style is no longer compatible with our direction. I absorbed this silently. Deirdre's departure wasn't what I had wanted or planned. My goal had been systemic change, not pushing individuals out. Helena seemed to read my thoughts. This is her choice, Avery. Some people can adapt to new realities, and some can't. The question is what happens with her team now. They'll need thoughtful leadership through this transition. Someone who understands both where we've been and where we're going. Helena nodded. My thoughts exactly. I'd like you to consider taking over as Director of Analytics. The offer caught me completely off guard. That would mean stepping back from the sustainability initiative. Not necessarily. You've built the framework. The next phase could involve applying these principles from a leadership position, showing it can be done. I asked for time to consider the offer. That evening, I sat in my apartment weighing the decision. The director role would bring greater influence and compensation. But something felt unfinished about my current work. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Helena. I've thought about your offer, I began. I'm honored, but I'd like to propose an alternative. She gestured for me to continue. The position of Director of Analytics should go to someone who excels at analytics. That's not my primary strength. What I've discovered these past months is that my real skill is in systems design and cultural transformation. Go on. I'd like to formalize my current role permanently, not as a temporary initiative, but as an ongoing function, Chief of Workplace Culture and Sustainability. I would work across departments to maintain what we've built and continue refining our approach. Helena studied me. That position doesn't exist in our organization structure. It didn't, I agreed, but neither did our current performance metrics or workload management systems. We created those because they were necessary. After a moment, she smiled. Draft a position description by next week. We'll need board approval, but you'll have my recommendation. 2 weeks later, the announcement went out company-wide. The sustainability initiative would become a permanent department. I would lead it with an expanded team and broader mandate. For Deirdre's replacement, Helena selected Eliza, a choice that surprised everyone except me. Beneath her quiet exterior, Eliza had demonstrated exceptional analytical skills and genuine care for her colleagues. She would lead differently than either Deirdre or I would have. The day before Deirdre's departure, she appeared at my office door. I invited her in, unsure what to expect. She sat stiffly in the chair across from my desk. I wanted to speak with you before I leave. I appreciate that. She seemed to struggle with her words. I still believe much of what you've implemented is idealistic. The market doesn't reward compassion. The data suggests otherwise, I replied gently. Perhaps. She placed a folder on my desk. These are my notes on the central banking project. There are complexities the team hasn't fully grasped yet. Eliza will need this context. I recognized the gesture for what it was. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. Thank you. I'll make sure she gets this. Deirdre stood to leave, then paused. That report you wrote, the one that started all this, how long had you been collecting that data? Almost a year. Every time someone quit or broke down or made an error from exhaustion, I documented it. She nodded slowly. I never saw it. Any of it. I was too focused on the targets. We all were. That was the system we operated in. And now you've changed the system. It wasn't a question, but there was something like reluctant respect in her voice. We've begun to, I corrected. Change takes time. After she left, I reflected on how differently this had all unfolded from what I'd initially imagined. 6 months ago, standing in Deirdre's doorway as she dismissed my burnout concerns, I'd fantasized about dramatic confrontations and public vindication. The reality had been more complex, more challenging, and ultimately more rewarding. The true victory wasn't in proving Deirdre wrong, it was in creating something better for everyone, including her. By the 1-year mark of the initiative, our company had become a case study in industry publications. Our employee retention had improved by 34%. Client satisfaction reached record highs. And for the first time in 5 years, we'd gone an entire quarter without a single stress-related medical leave. Helena invited me to present our results to the board of directors. Standing before them with my comprehensive data and employee testimonials, I thought about my journey from overlooked analyst to organizational changemaker. The numbers tell a compelling story, I concluded, but perhaps the most significant change isn't captured in our metrics. It's in the subtle shift from a culture of endurance to one of sustainability, from valuing hours to valuing impact. The board chair leaned forward. And the bottom line impact? I clicked to my final slide, a graph showing revenue growth alongside our culture metrics. The lines rose in parallel. As it turns out, the human bottom line and the financial bottom line are inseparable. When we stopped burning out our people, we started innovating again. When we created space for recovery, we enabled excellence. Afterward, as the boardroom emptied, the CEO approached me. Avery, what you've built here has implications beyond our company. Have you considered consulting? I smiled. I'm not interested in consulting. I'm interested in continuing what we've started. There's still work to do here. He nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough, but I think your story deserves a wider audience. That conversation planted a seed. Over the following months, I began speaking at industry conferences, sharing our journey and methodology. Companies facing similar challenges reached out for guidance. A business journal profiled our transformation. Each time I told the story, I made sure to emphasize that it wasn't about one heroic individual, but about changing systems that hurt people and ultimately hurt business. 18 months after that fateful day in Deirdre's office, I received an unexpected email. It came from her company address, now listing her position at the West Coast office. Avery, I've been following the coverage of what you've built at headquarters. I've also been implementing elements of your framework here, though I haven't publicly acknowledged their source. The results have been undeniable. I was wrong in how I treated you and the team. My definition of strength was flawed. It takes more courage to change a broken system than to perpetuate it. Deirdre. I sat with her words for a long time. There was no request for forgiveness, no dramatic apology, just a straightforward acknowledgement. It felt appropriate somehow. I composed a brief reply. Deirdre, thank you for your message. I'm glad to hear the framework is proving valuable in your new role. If you'd like to discuss implementation strategies sometime, I'd be open to that conversation. Avery. Simple, professional, forward-looking. The past couldn't be undone, but the future remained unwritten. That evening, as I packed up to leave at a reasonable hour, something that had once seemed impossible, I paused to look around the office. Teams were wrapping up their day, making plans for dinner, talking about weekend activities. No one was hiding anxiety attacks in bathroom stalls or sleeping under their desks. My revenge against a dismissive manager had transformed into something far more meaningful, a reimagining of what work could be. The note I'd handed Deirdre that Monday morning hadn't just changed my career trajectory, it had changed hundreds of lives, including hers. The greatest victory wasn't in making someone pay for how they'd treated me. It was in ensuring no one else would have to experience what I did. In the end, the most powerful response to adjust your attitude wasn't anger or resignation. It was innovation. If you're watching this and feeling trapped in a toxic workplace, remember, your experience is data. Your struggles are evidence. Your insights have value. Sometimes the most effective way to challenge a broken system is to illuminate it with undeniable truth. Don't just survive your workplace, transform it. And if you've found value in this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share your own experiences in the comments below. The conversation you start might be the catalyst someone else needs to create change in their environment. Remember, burnout isn't the price of success, it's the obstacle to achieving it. Your well-being matters, not just as a human right, but as the foundation for sustainable excellence. My name is Celeste Hartwell, and 3 months ago, I watched my boss tell 37 people their jobs were gone because the company was broke while I sat there, knowing about the $12 million hidden in executive bonus accounts that nobody thought I could access. The moment he said, "Financial constraints force us to eliminate this entire department," I felt something break inside me, but not in the way you'd think. I didn't feel sad or scared. I felt this weird, calm wash over me because I realized they'd just made the biggest mistake of their professional lives. See, I'd been processing financial reports for 8 years, quietly moving numbers around while executives treated me like office equipment. And during those 8 years, I'd accidentally discovered something they'd forgotten I had clearance to see. When our department head finished his little speech about belt tightening and necessary sacrifices, I raised my hand and asked if I should mention the Executive Emergency Fund that had been collecting money from our department's budget for the past 4 years. You should have seen his face. Everyone in that room turned to look at me like I'd just announced I was an alien, and the room got so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Before I go deeper into what happened, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know where my story is reaching people around the world. And also, like, subscribe, and click the bell icon, because what I'm about to tell you is going to show you exactly how I turned their own system against them, and you're not going to believe how this ends. So let me back up just a little bit. I worked for this massive technology company that everyone's heard of, one of those places with fancy offices and free snacks and motivational posters everywhere about being a family. For 8 years, I sat in the same cubicle processing purchase orders, expense reports, and budget transfers. My job was basically to make sure money went where it was supposed to go, which sounds boring but actually gave me access to more financial information than most people realize. I was like a traffic controller for company money, watching millions of dollars flow through different accounts every single day. The thing about working in finance is that you start seeing patterns. You notice when money moves in weird ways, or when accounts get funded from strange sources. And about 4 years ago, I started noticing something that didn't make sense. Every quarter, our department's budget would get reduced by exactly $50,000, but the reduction never showed up anywhere in our actual spending. It was like the money just vanished into thin air. At first, I thought it was an accounting error, but when I dug deeper, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was this account called Executive Contingency Reserve that was being funded by tiny amounts skimmed from departments all across the company. A few thousand here, a few thousand there, never enough for any individual department to notice, but it all added up. And this account wasn't for emergencies or company improvements. It was a slush fund that got distributed as bonus payments to senior executives every December. While they were telling us to cut costs and be more efficient, they were literally stealing money from our budgets to pay themselves extra bonuses. I probably should have reported it right then, but honestly, I was scared. These people had the power to destroy my career with one phone call, and I needed this job. I had student loans and rent and all the normal stuff that keeps you trapped in a place even when you know something's wrong. So I kept quiet and just kept doing my job, watching them take our money year after year while lecturing us about fiscal responsibility. But then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in September, and our department head called an all-hands meeting. Everyone gathered in the main conference room, and you could tell from his expression that something was wrong. He looked nervous and kept checking his notes like he was afraid he'd forget his lines. Then he dropped the bomb. Due to severe financial constraints and the need for immediate cost reduction, the entire financial processing department was being eliminated effective immediately. 37 people, some who'd been with the company for over a decade, were getting laid off with 2 weeks severance and a promise that they'd get positive references. People started crying. This woman named Patricia, who sat next to me, had just bought a house 6 months earlier, and she started hyperventilating. This guy named Jerome, who'd worked there for 15 years, just put his head in his hands and stared at the table. Everyone was devastated, and our department head kept going on about how difficult this decision was and how much the company valued our contributions. But tough economic realities demanded tough choices. That's when I raised my hand. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't sit there and listen to that garbage anymore. I said, very politely, before we accept our terminations, should I mention the Executive Contingency Reserve account that's been funded by transfers from our department budget for the past 4 years? Because I have the records showing approximately $12 million that's been distributed as bonuses while we're being told the company can't afford to keep us employed. The room went absolutely silent. Our department head's face turned this weird grayish color, and he started stammering about how that was confidential information and I shouldn't have access to those records. But here's the thing. I did have access because they'd never bothered to update my clearance levels. They thought I was just some quiet worker bee who moved numbers around without paying attention to what they meant. They were wrong. I pulled out my laptop and opened the file I'd been tracking for 4 years. $12.3 million, to be exact, skimmed from department budgets across the company and funneled into executive bonus payments. The same executives who are now claiming the company was in such dire financial straits that they needed to eliminate entire departments to survive. But here's where it gets interesting, and why I'm telling you this story. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't demand they reverse the layoffs or promise to expose them publicly. Instead, I did something they never saw coming. I smiled, closed my laptop, and said I understood their position completely. Then I mentioned that I'd be filing some paperwork with Human Resources before my departure, just to make sure everything was handled properly. What they didn't know was that during my 8 years of processing corporate policies and procedures, I'd discovered something buried deep in the employee handbook. There was this obscure provision called Emergency Financial Hardship Review that allowed employees facing termination due to company financial distress to request a comprehensive audit of company finances. The policy was probably written decades ago by some lawyer covering the company's liability, and it had never been used because most people don't know it exists. But I knew it existed, and I knew exactly how to trigger it. The provision stated that if any employee or group of employees faced termination specifically due to claimed financial hardship by the company, They had the right to request verification of that financial hardship through an independent review of all company financial records. The company then had 30 days to either prove genuine financial distress by opening their books to employee representatives or negotiate alternative compensation to avoid the audit. So I went straight to Human Resources and filed emergency financial hardship review requests on behalf of every single person who'd been laid off. 37 separate requests, all perfectly legal, all completely within company policy. Each request demanded either proof of genuine financial hardship or appropriate compensation for wrongful termination based on false financial claims. The beautiful part was that I'd structured the requests to require disclosure of all executive compensation, including bonuses, contingency funds, and discretionary spending. If they wanted to prove they were broke, they'd have to show every penny they'd been paying themselves while claiming poverty. And if they refused to open their books, they'd have to explain to 37 employees why they couldn't prove the financial distress they'd claimed as justification for mass layoffs. I submitted the paperwork on a Friday afternoon and went home for the weekend feeling calmer than I'd felt in years. I knew they'd spend the weekend scrambling to figure out their options, and I knew they weren't going to like any of them. Monday morning, I got a call from the company's head of legal, very polite, very professional, asking if I'd be available for a meeting to discuss my recent filings. I said absolutely, and suggested we include representatives for all the other affected employees since their cases were identical to mine. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday morning. I spent Tuesday evening preparing a simple presentation outlining the legal requirements of the emergency financial hardship review process, including the 30-day deadline and the potential consequences of non-compliance. I also prepared a detailed analysis of the executive contingency reserve account, showing exactly how much money had been extracted from our department's budget over the past 4 years. Wednesday morning arrived, and I walked into that conference room with 36 of my former colleagues and 3 company lawyers. The lawyers looked like they hadn't slept in days, and they kept whispering to each other and checking their phones. Our department head wasn't there. Apparently, he'd called in sick. The head lawyer explained that the company had reviewed our requests and wanted to discuss a resolution that would be beneficial for everyone involved. They were prepared to offer enhanced severance packages to avoid the time and expense of a formal financial review process. Each employee would receive 6 months' salary plus benefits continuation, and the company would provide placement services to help everyone find new positions. I listened politely, then asked what they considered enhanced about offering us 6 months when we were legally entitled to a complete financial disclosure if they couldn't prove legitimate hardship. I mentioned that based on my calculations, if the executive contingency reserve had been distributed to employees instead of executives over the past 4 years, each person in our department would have received approximately $43,000 in additional compensation. The lawyers went into another huddle. When they came back, they'd increase the offer to 12 months' salary for each employee, plus extended benefits and a guarantee of positive references. I smiled and said that was generous, but still represented less compensation than we'd have received if our department budget hadn't been systematically transferred to executive bonuses. I suggested they might want to reconsider their position, since we had 24 days remaining before the formal audit began. This went on for 2 hours. Every time they made an offer, I'd politely explain why it didn't adequately address the situation. I never got angry, never made threats, never even raised my voice. I just kept referring back to the company's own policies and the mathematical reality of how much money had been diverted from our budgets to executive compensation. Finally, the head lawyer asked to speak with me privately. We stepped outside the conference room, and he told me very directly that the company was prepared to make this situation go away, but I needed to understand that I was playing a dangerous game. Important people were very unhappy about these filings, and my future employment prospects could be seriously damaged if I continued to push this matter. I looked him straight in the eye and said I appreciated his concern for my career, but I was curious about something. If the company was genuinely experiencing financial hardships severe enough to justify eliminating an entire department, why were they so reluctant to prove it through the audit process their own policies provided? Wouldn't transparent financial disclosure actually support their position and demonstrate responsible corporate governance to shareholders? He stared at me for a long moment, then said he'd need to make some phone calls. The meeting was suspended until the following day. That evening, I got a call from Patricia, the woman who'd been hyperventilating about her new house. She wanted to know what was happening and whether she should get her hopes up. I told her honestly that I didn't know what the company would decide, but I was confident they'd come back with a much better offer the next day. Thursday morning, we reconvened. This time there were 5 lawyers in the room, plus someone from corporate who'd flown in overnight. They had a new proposal. Each affected employee would receive 2 years' salary as severance, plus full benefits continuation for 18 months, plus guaranteed positive references, plus the company would cover all costs associated with job placement services. In return, all employees would sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements and agree not to pursue any further legal action related to their termination. 2 years' salary. For 37 people, that represented millions of dollars in compensation. I looked around the room at my former colleagues, and I could see the relief on their faces. For most of them, this was life-changing money that would give them time to find new jobs without financial pressure. But I wasn't done yet. I asked about the executive contingency reserve account. Would it be discontinued to prevent similar situations in the future? The lawyers exchanged glances and said that was outside the scope of our current discussion. I nodded and said I understood their position. However, I'd noticed that the emergency financial hardship review policy didn't actually allow for settlements that left the underlying financial practices unchanged. The policy was designed to either verify legitimate financial hardship or correct inappropriate financial management that led to unnecessary employee terminations. In other words, taking their money wouldn't stop me from pursuing the audit. The policy required resolution of the systemic financial issues, not just compensation for affected employees. You should have seen their faces. The lawyer who'd threatened my career prospects the day before looked like he was about to have a heart attack. The corporate representative started frantically typing on her phone. Another huddle. This one lasted 15 minutes. When they came back, they had a final offer. 2 years' salary for all employees, full benefits, placement services, and positive references. Plus, the executive contingency reserve account would be dissolved, and all remaining funds would be distributed equally among company employees as a special bonus. Additionally, the company would implement new financial oversight procedures to prevent similar budget diversions in the future. I asked how much was currently in the executive contingency reserve account. $4.7 million. I asked how many total employees the company had. Approximately 800. So in addition to our 2-year severance packages, every employee in the company would receive roughly $6,000, and the executives would lose their secret bonus fund permanently. I looked around the room at my colleagues. Patricia was crying again, but this time from relief. Jerome was grinning like he'd won the lottery. Everyone was nodding at me like I was some kind of hero. But this is where the story takes a turn that nobody in that room saw coming, including me. I said the offer was acceptable for my colleagues, but I had one additional requirement for my own settlement. I wanted something that wasn't about money at all. I told them I wanted complete access to the company's client database, vendor contracts, and operational procedures for 90 days after my termination date. Not to steal anything or violate confidentiality, but to conduct what I called a knowledge transfer assessment to ensure the company could maintain operational efficiency after losing our entire department. The lawyers looked confused. The corporate representative asked why I'd want access to information that had nothing to do with my former position in financial processing. I explained that during my 8 years with the company, I'd noticed inefficiencies and redundancies that were costing significant money. Since they were so concerned about financial constraints, I thought they'd appreciate an opportunity to identify additional cost savings that could prevent future layoffs. I'd provide a comprehensive report documenting my findings, and they could implement or ignore my suggestions as they saw fit. It sounded reasonable, maybe even helpful. The lawyers huddled again, but this conversation was shorter. They agreed to provide me with 90-day consulting access to conduct my operational assessment, with appropriate confidentiality agreements, of course. We shook hands. Paperwork was signed. Within a week, everyone had their settlement agreements and access to their severance payments. The executive contingency reserve was dissolved, and every company employee got their $6,000 bonus. Patricia used her money to pay off her new house completely. Jerome decided to start his own consulting business. Everyone was happy. But here's what none of them knew, and this is where the story gets really interesting. I'd been planning this for 3 years. See, I wasn't just some random financial processor who accidentally discovered executive corruption. I was Helena Hartwell's daughter. Helena Hartwell was one of the original software architects who helped build this company back when it was just 5 people working out of a garage. She wrote most of the core code that the company still uses today, designed the basic operational framework, and created the client management systems that generated billions in revenue over the years. And when the company went public and made the founders incredibly wealthy, they cut her out completely, told her that her contributions had been work for hire, that she had no ownership stake, and that her employment could be terminated at any time. She spent her life savings fighting them in court, but their lawyers buried her in paperwork until she couldn't afford to continue. She died when I was 19, broke and bitter, and convinced that the people she'd helped make rich had stolen everything she'd worked for. I promised myself that someday I'd find a way to balance those scales. So I spent 8 years getting hired by her former company, working my way into a position where I could access their financial records, learning their systems inside and out, and waiting for the right opportunity. The executive bonus fund was just the opening I needed to get inside their decision-making process. But the real target was never the money. It was something much more valuable. During those 90 days of consulting access, I wasn't looking for operational inefficiencies. I was documenting every single piece of intellectual property that my mother had created, every system and process that could be traced back to her original work, and every way the company was still profiting from innovations she'd developed 30 years ago. And I was building something else, a detailed analysis of every major client contract, every vendor relationship, every operational procedure that kept this company running. I was creating a complete blueprint of how to compete with them. Because that was my real plan, not to destroy them with lawsuits or public embarrassment, but to beat them at their own game using the knowledge my mother had given them and they'd stolen from her. 6 months after my termination, I opened Hartwell Systems directly across the street from their main office. I used part of my settlement money as startup capital, but the real advantage was what I'd learned during those 8 years inside their company. I knew exactly which clients were unhappy with their service. I knew which vendors were frustrated with their payment terms. I knew which employees were underpaid and overworked. And I knew every weakness in their operational structure that could be exploited by a smaller, more efficient competitor. My first client was actually one of their biggest accounts, a manufacturing company that had been complaining for years about slow response times and inflexible contract terms. I approached them with a proposal that offered faster service, better support, and significantly lower costs. When they asked how I could afford to undercut the market leader by 30%, I explained that my overhead was lower because I wasn't funding executive bonus schemes. They signed immediately. Within 3 months, I'd hired 12 former employees from my old company, including Patricia and Jerome. People who knew the systems, understood the clients, and were motivated to prove that the financial constraints that had cost them their jobs were actually just corporate greed. Within 6 months, I'd signed 47 new clients, including 16 who'd switched over from my former employer. My old company started scrambling to match my pricing, but they couldn't do it without cutting into their executive compensation packages. That's when things got really fun. Remember those financial oversight procedures they'd agreed to implement? The ones that were supposed to prevent budget diversions like the executive contingency reserve? Well, it turns out that when you're suddenly losing major clients to a competitor who's offering drastically lower prices, the pressure to find new revenue sources becomes intense. I'd anticipated this. In fact, I'd counted on it. I started hearing from former colleagues who were still working there that executives were pushing for creative accounting solutions to maintain profit margins while matching competitor pricing. Budget transfers were happening again, just more carefully hidden this time. So, I did something that probably sounds crazy. I sent them a gift. I had a bouquet of flowers delivered to the CEO's office with a note that said, Congratulations on your new financial oversight procedures. I'm confident they'll prevent any future budget irregularities. And I signed it, Helena Hartwell's daughter. That's when they realized who I actually was. Suddenly, everything made sense to them. The way I'd known about the executive contingency reserve, the way I'd navigated their legal procedures so smoothly, the way I'd been able to compete with them so effectively right out of the gate. They understood that this wasn't just about revenge for a layoff. This was about settling a debt that was 3 decades old. But here's the thing. By the time they figured it out, it was too late to do anything about it. I'd been careful to stay completely within legal boundaries. Everything I'd done was either explicitly allowed by their own policies or standard competitive business practice. They couldn't sue me for using information I'd legitimately accessed during my employment. They couldn't claim I'd violated my non-disclosure agreement because I hadn't revealed any confidential information publicly. And they couldn't accuse me of unfair competition because offering better service at lower prices is literally what competition is supposed to be. Meanwhile, my business kept growing. More clients, more employees, more market share. And every success felt like honoring my mother's memory in a way that lawsuits never could have. But the real vindication came 18 months after I'd started Hartwell Systems. My former employer's stock price had dropped 40% as investors lost confidence in their ability to compete effectively. 3 of the executives who'd been receiving those bonus payments were terminated for strategic failures. The company had to lay off 2 more departments to cut costs. And this time, there really were legitimate financial constraints. That's when I got a call from their current CEO, a man who'd replaced the previous CEO after the stock price collapse. He wanted to meet with me to discuss a potential partnership opportunity. I agreed to the meeting, mostly out of curiosity. He offered to buy Hartwell Systems for $47 million. I listened to his entire presentation, asked a few clarifying questions about the terms, and then told him I appreciated the offer but wasn't interested in selling. Instead, I made him a counteroffer. Hartwell Systems would be happy to acquire certain operational divisions of his company, particularly those involving the original software architecture and client management systems. We'd be willing to offer fair market value for those assets, along with employment guarantees for affected staff. Essentially, I offered to buy back the parts of the company my mother had helped create. He said he'd need to discuss it with his board of directors. 2 weeks later, he called back with a different proposal. Instead of acquisition, would I be interested in a consulting contract to help them restructure their operations for improved efficiency? They were particularly interested in my insights into cost reduction strategies that didn't require personnel cuts. I told him I'd consider it, but any consulting work would need to include proper attribution for the foundational systems my mother had developed. Historical credit where credit was due. He agreed. So now I have a consulting contract with my mother's former company, helping them fix the problems created by the same executives who'd stolen her work and cut her out of the profits. I'm being paid very well to undo the damage caused by their greed and short-sighted decision-making. And the best part? Every recommendation I make, every improvement I suggest, every cost-saving measure I implement gets documented in reports that explicitly acknowledge Helena Hartwell's contributions to the company's foundational success. Her name is now officially part of their corporate record, and her innovations are finally being credited properly. The executives who betrayed her are gone. The company that tried to erase her legacy now pays her daughter to fix their mistakes. And Helena Hartwell's name is permanently embedded in the corporate history of a billion-dollar company. That's revenge. Not destroying them, but succeeding so completely that they have to acknowledge what they tried to steal. Not bringing them down, but rising so high that they have to look up to see me. Not making them suffer, but making them pay, literally pay, for the wisdom they should have valued from the beginning. My mother died thinking she'd failed, that her work had been stolen and her contributions forgotten, but she'd actually planted seeds that took 30 years to grow. She'd taught me everything I needed to know, not just about software and systems, but about persistence and justice and the long game. The executives who thought they were firing a quiet financial processor had actually awakened Helena Hartwell's daughter. And Helena Hartwell's daughter had spent 8 years learning everything they'd taught her mother, plus everything they'd forgotten they'd taught me. Today, Hartwell Systems has 230 employees, an annual revenue of $86 million. We're consistently rated as one of the best companies to work for in our region, partly because our executives don't have secret bonus funds. And every year, on the anniversary of my mother's death, I send flowers to the original founders who are still alive. The card always says the same thing. Thank you for teaching me what not to do. I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to think about someone who underestimated you, someone who treated you like you didn't matter, someone who thought they could use you and throw you away. Now I want you to imagine what you could accomplish if you spent 8 years learning everything they think they know better than you do. That's your homework. And I want you to tell me in the comments what you're going to do with that knowledge, because I read every single comment and I want to hear your story. Like this video, if you believe that the best revenge is success that can't be ignored, subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who turned the tables on those who underestimated them. And click that bell icon, because next week I'm going to tell you about the woman who discovered her boss was stealing credit for her work and ended up getting him fired from his own family's company. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead. The cruel certainty in Brant's voice scraped against my skin like sandpaper as he cornered me by the coffee machine. His 6'2" frame blocked the exit, his cologne overpowering the coffee aroma as he leaned in, voice low but cutting. Isla, I wanted to give you a friendly heads up before tomorrow's meeting. His smile never touched his eyes. Don't get your hopes up about that executive promotion. A woman managing a $200,000 responsibility? The old boys won't have it. I gripped my mug tighter, scalding liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The break room suddenly felt airless. Excuse me? I managed, hating how my voice sounded small. Look, you're good for a product developer, but executive suite? That's different territory. He patted my shoulder with patronizing familiarity. I just don't want you to be blindsided tomorrow. I've been groomed for this position for years. Heat crawled up my neck that had nothing to do with the steam from my coffee. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, of sacrificed weekends and holidays, of brilliant solutions that saved failing projects, all dismissed in a 20-second conversation. Thanks for your concern, I said, forcing my voice steady. But I'll take my chances with the board's judgment. His laugh was soft, practiced. Of course, just looking out for you. As he walked away, he called over his shoulder, wear something nice tomorrow. At least you'll look good when they let you down easy. 24 hours later, I sat in the polished conference room, hyper-aware of every breath, every glance. I'd chosen a tailored navy suit, professional, uncompromising, despite Brant's suggestion to wear that cute red dress. The board members filed in, faces unreadable. Across the table, Brant radiated confidence in his custom suit, occasionally throwing glances my way as if I were already defeated. Each time our eyes met, his lips would quirk into that same condescending smile from yesterday. Chief Financial Officer Merrick arrived last, setting down a leather portfolio before taking his seat at the head of the table. The room hushed. Thank you all for coming, he began. As you know, we're here to finalize our decision for the new executive position. My pulse thrummed in my ears. 5 candidates had been shortlisted 3 months ago. Last week, it had narrowed to just Brant and me. Merrick reviewed the position requirements, speaking about strategic vision and leadership capacity. I focused on keeping my breathing even, my expression composed, while beside me, Brant nodded at key points as if agreeing with observations about himself. Both final candidates have impressive qualifications, Merrick continued. Brant has been with us for 7 years, showing consistent growth in our acquisition department. Ayla joined us 5 years ago and has demonstrated exceptional skill in product innovation before her recent transfer to regional development. Brant's transfer of me, his strategic play to prove my incompetence in an unfamiliar department, a move he hadn't expected to backfire so spectacularly. Before we conclude, Merrick said, there's one element of performance I'd like everyone to consider that wasn't previously discussed. He tapped his tablet, and the wall screen illuminated with a series of graphs I'd never seen before. The room fell completely silent. This represents client loyalty shifts over 12 months, separated by who managed each relationship. Two lines traversed the screen, one blue, steadily climbing, one red, erratically declining. My name labeled the blue line, Brant's labeled the red. I glanced sideways. Brant's expression transformed instantly. His smugness vanished, replaced by visible shock, then panic as he scanned the data points. As you can see, Merrick continued, there's been a significant shift in client retention patterns since Isla took over the accounts previously managed by Brant. Brant cleared his throat. Sir, with respect, these metrics weren't part of the evaluation criteria. Client retention has always been our primary metric, Brant. Merrick cut in. The question is, why we're only seeing the true numbers now? The board members exchanged glances. Tension thickened the air. Merrick turned to me. Ayla, 3 months ago you were transferred to regional development after 5 years in product innovation. This wasn't your requested move, correct? That's correct, sir. Yet instead of failing, as some might have expected, you excelled. Can you explain how? Brant shifted beside me. I could feel his panic radiating like heat. When I joined regional development, I began carefully. I noticed several concerning patterns in our client communications. Messages went unanswered for days. Follow-ups were generic. Relationship management seemed focused on acquisition numbers rather than satisfaction metrics. I paused, aware of every eye on me. What they didn't know when I was transferred was my background before joining the company. 2 years in relationship development at my previous workplace, plus specialized training in my MBA program. I simply applied those principles here. Merrick nodded, expression thoughtful. And you implemented a new response protocol without official authorization. I did, sir. The situation seemed urgent enough to warrant immediate action. Another board member leaned forward. Yet, you never brought these concerns to leadership directly. I met her gaze steadily. I believed actions would speak louder than accusations. Brant's breathing had become audible. His right leg bounced beneath the table. Merrick turned the screen to a new slide, a client satisfaction comparison that made several board members inhale sharply. The decision for this position, Merrick said slowly, must reflect not just past performance, but future potential. Leadership isn't just about impressive presentations. It's about measurable results and integrity. He looked directly at Brant. Would you care to explain these discrepancies in your reported acquisition success versus actual client retention? The moment hung suspended. Brant's face had gone pale. There must be some mistake in the data, he stammered. There's no mistake, Merrick replied. We've had an independent audit. He turned to the board. I believe we have all we need to make our decision. The vote was unanimous. As Merrick announced my promotion to Executive Director of Client Relations, with its accompanying $200,000 salary, Brant's face twisted into something ugly and unfamiliar. When the meeting adjourned, board members approached to congratulate me. Through the crowd, I caught Brant's eye as he slipped toward the door. His expression promised this wasn't over. I had no idea then how right that intuition would prove. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had someone try to sabotage your career, then you understand the burning in my chest that day. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about justice in a world where too often, talented women are pushed aside. If this resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories that expose workplace inequality. I promise, what happens next will show just how far some people will go when their privilege is threatened, and how sweet justice can be when it finally arrives. My name is Ayla Frost, and until 3 months ago, I led the product innovation team at Merrick Industries. At 34, I was the youngest team leader in company history, with a reputation for turning failing projects into successes. I'm methodical, detail-oriented, and I never make a move without considering all possible outcomes, a quality my chess champion father instilled in me from childhood. Growing up in a small Midwest town with my father, a mathematics professor, and my mother, a concert pianist, excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. When other kids got ice cream for B+ grades, I got serious conversations about where I'd lost those few points. It wasn't cruel, it was preparation. The world will judge you twice as harshly, my mother would say, tucking my wild curls behind my ears, so you must be twice as good. I carried that lesson through college, through my MBA, through every professional step. I learned to work within systems while quietly changing them from the inside. I learned to smile through dismissive comments, to come prepared with twice the research, to speak with such authority that interruptions became awkward rather than expected. When I joined Merrick Industries, I quickly realized I'd entered a boys' club, where promotions often happened on golf courses and at whiskey tastings I wasn't invited to attend. Rather than fight the obvious, I decided to become indispensable. When projects faltered, I volunteered to fix them. When deadlines seemed impossible, I made them happen. I built a reputation not through networking, but through results no one could deny. Brant Pierce had been watching my rise with increasing discomfort. He'd joined 2 years before me, moving quickly into acquisition management where his charisma and confidence made him a natural. He became known for his impressive presentations, his bold promises, his ability to command a room. What few people noticed was how rarely his grand predictions materialized into actual results. Our paths rarely crossed until the executive position opened. Suddenly, Brant seemed to appear wherever I was, offering unsolicited advice, questioning my methods in meetings, making small remarks that undermined my confidence. Then came the transfer. "Ayla, this is actually good news," Merrick had said, not meeting my eyes as he explained my move to regional development. "Brant suggested you need broader experience before executive consideration. The board agrees." I'd sat there, stunned into silence, as my 5 years of specialized expertise was dismissed as insufficient. Regional development wasn't just outside my wheelhouse. It was widely considered a punishment post where difficult employees were sent to either reform or resign. The team was underperforming, clients were unhappy, and leadership had largely abandoned hope for improvement. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the city lights, considering resignation. My phone buzzed with a text from Brant. "Heard the news. Tough break. Let me know if you need any pointers on client management." Something hardened inside me. I'd spent my life proving people wrong. This would be no different. My first day in regional development revealed the depth of the problem. The office atmosphere was defeatist. Team members arrived late, left early, and spent the intervening hours shifting blame. Client communications were buried in overflowing inboxes. Follow-up calls were scripted and rushed. "We used to have systems," explained Nev, a talented but demoralized team member. But when Brant managed this department, he dismantled them for his relationship-based approach. Then he got promoted, and we were left trying to maintain his impossible standards. I spent that first week observing, cataloging issues, reviewing client histories. A pattern emerged. Brant had reported record acquisition numbers, but retention was abysmal. Clients signed on, experienced poor service, and left, only to be replaced by new acquisitions that followed the same cycle. Meanwhile, in executive meetings, Brant showcased impressive-looking results about new client numbers. Leadership was captivated. I spotted inconsistencies but kept quiet, choosing instead to build stronger relationships with existing clients while implementing systematic improvements to our response protocols. When a significant client threatened to leave, mentioning they'd received no attention to their concerns for months, I intervened personally. Looking deeper into previous interactions, I discovered dozens of similar complaints across many relationships, all supposedly handled through Brant's groundbreaking approach that had earned him his promotion. Rather than exposing him immediately, I suggested collaboration. "Your acquisition approach seems remarkable." I told him over lunch one day, "Let me handle some of the day-to-day relationship maintenance while you concentrate on the bigger picture. We could make an impressive team." His ego couldn't resist. "That's actually quite insightful, Ayla. You focus on maintaining what I bring in. Smart division of labor." He eagerly accepted, not realizing I was now directly connecting with clients he'd neglected. I built ways to gauge actual satisfaction and loyalty, aspects nobody had properly measured before. The results were alarming, revealing a house of cards that had been carefully hidden beneath misleading statistics. As the executive promotion announcement drew closer, Brant intensified his efforts to undermine me. He'd challenge my ideas with questions designed to make me appear unprepared in meetings. He'd arrange competing priorities when I needed key decision makers present. He began hinting to colleagues that I wasn't the right fit for executive expectations. Then came the coffee machine confrontation, his final attempt to shake my confidence before the board meeting that would decide our fates. What Brant didn't know was that I'd already spoken confidentially with Merrick the week before, presenting my findings not as accusations against Brant, but as opportunities for systemic improvement. I'd shown him the true client satisfaction metrics, the retention patterns, the discrepancies between reported acquisitions and actual revenue. I hadn't expected Merrick to use this information in the promotion meeting itself. I'd simply wanted the truth on record, regardless of the outcome. Now, walking back to my office with my new executive title, I struggled to process the dramatic reversal. Congratulatory emails were already flooding my inbox. My team waited with champagne and awkward hugs. Through it all, one thought kept circling. This wasn't over. Brant had built his career on the perception of success. I had just publicly shattered that perception. Men like Brant didn't accept defeat. They retaliated. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Enjoy your victory lap. It'll be brief." I stared at the screen, ice forming in my stomach. The champagne suddenly tasted sour. "Everything okay?" Neve asked, noticing my expression. I forced a smile, pocketing my phone. Perfect, just perfect. I had no idea then that the real battle was just beginning, that Brant's humiliation would fuel a vendetta I wasn't prepared for, or that my victory would prove far more dangerous than my defeat had ever been. The news of my promotion spread through the company with the speed of a digital wildfire. Emails flooded my inbox, most congratulatory, some surprised, a few suspiciously enthusiastic from people who'd never acknowledged me before. The executive suite welcomed me with professional cordiality, though I caught the occasional sidelong glance that suggested not everyone was thrilled with the board's decision. Brant, meanwhile, had disappeared. His office door remained closed for 3 days following the announcement. Rumors circulated. He was updating his resume. He was plotting a dramatic resignation. He was consulting with attorneys about age discrimination, though at 37, barely 3 years my senior, this seemed laughable. I focused on transition planning, determined to begin my executive tenure with clear objectives and measurable goals. Neve, who had quickly become my most trusted team member, helped me prepare a comprehensive briefing for my first executive committee meeting. "You know he'll try to sabotage you," she said as we worked late one evening. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving us alone with delivery food and spreadsheets. Brant doesn't lose gracefully. "I know," I admitted, "but what can he really do? The numbers speak for themselves." Nev's expression remained troubled. "Just watch your back. Brant has friends in unexpected places." I discovered how right she was the following Monday. Arriving early for the executive committee meeting, I found 2 board members, Hamilton and Weston, already seated, deep in conversation that abruptly halted when I entered. "Ayla," Hamilton acknowledged with a tight smile. "Settling in?" "Very well, thank you," I replied, arranging my materials at the table. "Ambitious first quarter projections," Weston remarked, glancing at my presentation notes. Perhaps unrealistically so. The comment stung. He hadn't even seen the full presentation yet. "They're based on current trajectory with moderate acceleration," I explained. "Actually conservative given our recent improvements." His skepticism hung in the air. "Well, we'll see, won't we?" As other executives filed in, the tension eased somewhat. Merrick arrived last, nodding encouragingly as I prepared to present. I'd just pulled up my first slide when the door opened again. Brant strode in, immaculately dressed, expression pleasant. "Sorry I'm late," he announced, taking the empty seat directly across from me. Traffic was brutal. The room went silent. Brant had no reason to attend this meeting. He wasn't part of the executive committee. Merrick frowned. "Brant, this is a closed meeting." "Oh, I know," Brant replied smoothly. "But given that Ayla will be presenting strategies built on the foundation of my work, I thought my insights might be valuable." He turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just here to support the team." Before Merrick could respond, Hamilton spoke up. "Actually, I invited him. Given the transition, having both perspectives seemed prudent." I felt a chill. Hamilton had bypassed Merrick's authority. Clear signal of the alliance Neve had warned me about. Merrick's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Very well. Isla, please proceed. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision for client relationship management, including systematic improvements and retention strategies. Throughout, Brant nodded thoughtfully, occasionally jotting notes. His apparent cooperativeness was more unnerving than open hostility would have been. Questions? I concluded. Just one, Brant said immediately. These relationship protocols you're proposing, they seem remarkably similar to systems I implemented 3 years ago, before moving to a more dynamic approach. Are you essentially suggesting we revert to outdated methodologies? The trap was beautifully laid. If I acknowledged the similarity, I'd appear unoriginal. If I denied it, I'd seem defensive or dishonest. Good observation, I replied calmly. There are fundamental similarities because certain relationship principles are timeless. The difference lies in implementation and accountability. My approach incorporates real-time feedback loops and transparent metrics that weren't previously utilized. Brant's smile tightened fractionally. Fascinating reframing. Though I wonder if the board realizes these new strategies are essentially relabeled versions of existing protocols. They're hardly relabeled, I countered, feeling heat rise in my cheeks despite my determination to remain composed. The core difference, is primarily in presentation rather than substance. Brant interrupted smoothly. Which is fine. Sometimes old ideas need new packaging to feel fresh. I'm just clarifying for everyone's benefit. Several committee members shifted uncomfortably. Doubt had been planted, exactly as Brant intended. Merrick intervened. Let's focus on projected outcomes rather than methodology origins. Ayla, could you elaborate on the retention improvements you anticipate? The meeting continued, but the damage was done. Brant had successfully positioned me as derivative rather than innovative, a critical blow in a company that prided itself on forward thinking. Afterward, as others filed out, Brant lingered. Solid presentation, he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. Very comprehensive. Was there something specific you wanted to add? I asked, gathering my materials. Just this. He leaned closer. You got lucky once. Don't count on it happening again. Before I could respond, he straightened and walked away, exchanging pleasantries with Hamilton at the door. That night, I received another text from the unknown number. First round goes to me. Sleep well, Executive Director. I forwarded the message to Neve with the caption, It's started. Her response came immediately. Need to talk. Not on company devices or premises. Breakfast tomorrow. We met at a small cafe 10 blocks from the office. Neve arrived, looking exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes. You look like you haven't slept, I observed as she slid into the booth. Been researching. She pulled out her personal tablet. About Brant. There are things you need to know. What she revealed over the next hour changed everything I thought I understood about my situation. Brant's history before Merrick Industries included 2 previous companies where promising female executives had resigned abruptly after conflicts with him. Both women had signed NDAs as part of their separation agreements. How did you find this? I asked, stunned. I have a friend in HR consulting who worked with one of these companies. She couldn't tell me details because of confidentiality, but she confirmed the pattern. Brant identifies female competition, undermines them systematically, then presents himself as the reasonable alternative when they eventually break under the pressure. My coffee grew cold as I processed this. So the executive committee meeting was just his opening move? Nev confirmed. He'll escalate gradually, make you doubt yourself, isolate you from allies, create situations where you appear emotionally unstable or professionally incompetent. I struggled for words. Methodical? Neve supplied. Calculated? Yes, and effective. Neither woman lasted more than 6 months after he targeted them. I pushed my untouched breakfast aside. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? Nev's expression hardened. Because I was at Western Solutions when Brant destroyed Tessa Rivera's career. She was brilliant, the most innovative product developer I'd ever worked with. After she left, I transferred here, only to find Brant had arrived 6 months earlier. The coincidence seemed impossible. And you never said anything? What could I say? I had no proof, just observations. Besides, he was in acquisitions. I was in regional development. Our paths rarely crossed until I was transferred to your department. I finished. The pieces suddenly aligned. That's why you were so quick to help me implement changes. She nodded. I recognized his pattern immediately. The transfer, the impossible expectations, the subtle undermining. But you did something neither Tessa nor the other woman managed. You turned his trap into your advantage. And now he's escalating, I murmured. Exactly. This isn't about the promotion anymore. It's about his reputation, his self-image. He can't allow you to succeed where he failed. I considered this, mind racing through implications. So, what's the play? Go to HR? Merrick? Nev laughed bitterly. With what? Vague texts from an anonymous number? A pattern only visible if you know to look for it? HR won't touch this without concrete evidence. And Merrick? She hesitated. Merrick may support you professionally, but he won't risk company reputation on what amounts to workplace politics. She was right. In the corporate world, even legitimate complaints were often buried to protect the institution. Without irrefutable evidence, I'd be labeled oversensitive at best, vindictive at worst. So I'm on my own. Not entirely. Neve met my eyes steadily. You have me. And more importantly, you have something Tessa and the other woman didn't. What's that? You know his playbook now. And forewarned is forearmed. Over the following weeks, Brandt's campaign unfolded exactly as Neve had predicted. Projects I initiated faced mysterious delays. Reports I needed arrived incomplete or late. In meetings, my points were questioned with surgical precision, often based on information that should have been confidential. The most damaging incident occurred during my presentation to our largest client. Midway through, their CFO raised concerns about discrepancies in our projected delivery timelines, discrepancies that existed only in the materials they'd somehow received, not in my actual presentation. This is not the timeline we provided, I stated, maintaining composure while internally panicking. It came directly from your office yesterday, the CFO insisted, sliding a document across the table bearing my electronic signature. I recognized immediately what had happened but couldn't say it aloud. Someone had accessed my digital signature and applied it to falsified materials. The meeting dissolved into damage control, with the client departing unsatisfied despite my assurances. Back at the office, I discovered the security footage from the server room had experienced a technical glitch during the time frame when the false documents would have been created. IT could confirm only that someone with executive-level clearance had accessed the system. That evening, alone in my office, I received another text. Clients losing confidence already? Shame. I placed my phone face down on my desk, hands trembling with fury and frustration. This wasn't just professional sabotage. It was personal destruction, meticulously orchestrated to appear as my own incompetence. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Merrick entered without waiting for response. Rough day, he observed, settling into the chair across from me. You could say that. I maintained a neutral expression, uncertain of his purpose. The client situation. Unfortunate misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I corrected. It was deliberate sabotage. Merrick's expression remained impassive. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. He studied me for a long moment. You're suggesting someone intentionally undermined a 12 million client relationship too. What? Make you look bad? Put that way, it sounded paranoid. Exactly as intended. I'm suggesting, I said carefully, that the document they received was not created by me or anyone on my team, despite bearing my signature. Electronic signatures can be glitchy, Merrick offered. It is investigating. We both knew IT would find nothing conclusive. The sabotage was too professional, too careful. Ayla, Merrick continued, his tone shifting to something gentler. The executive role is demanding. The pressure can be overwhelming. If you need support, I don't need support, I interrupted, recognizing the dangerous direction this conversation was taking. I need security protocols that prevent tampering with official communications. He nodded slowly. Of course, I'll speak with IT about enhancing our safeguards. He rose to leave, then paused. Just between us, some board members have expressed concerns about your transition. This client situation hasn't helped. The warning was clear. I was being watched, and not favorably. After he left, I sat motionless, mind racing. Brant's strategy was working perfectly. Each incident isolated me further, made me appear less stable, less capable. If this continued, within months I'd be exactly where he wanted me, discredited, doubted, and ultimately dismissed. That night, I made a decision. If Brant wanted to play this game, I would play it too, but with different rules. He expected me to break under pressure, to become emotional, to make mistakes in my desperation, to prove myself. Instead, I would become the perfect executive, calm, rational, methodical. I would document everything, create redundant backups for all communications, record every interaction. Most importantly, I would give him exactly the target he expected: a woman increasingly paranoid, increasingly isolated. While behind that facade, I would build my case, piece by methodical piece. The next morning, I called Nev to my office and outlined my plan. Her eyes widened as I explained what I intended. "That's incredibly risky," she said when I finished. "If you're wrong about any part of this—" "I'm not wrong." My certainty surprised even me. This is what I've trained for my entire life without realizing it. Analyzing systems, identifying weaknesses, implementing solutions that others don't see coming. He's dangerous, Ayla. Not just professionally. So am I. I met her, concerned gaze steadily. My father didn't just teach me chess. He taught me that when conventional moves fail, you create new ones. Brant expects me to play defense. He won't see this coming. Neve hesitated, then nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Eyes and ears, information, and absolute discretion." "You have it." She rose to leave, then turned back. "Just be careful. People like Brant, they don't have the normal boundaries most of us do." Her warning proved prophetic sooner than either of us anticipated. 3 days later, I received an urgent call from building security at 2 a.m. There had been a break-in at my office. Nothing appeared stolen, but my desk had been searched, drawers left open, files disturbed. The security footage showed only shadows. The cameras had been expertly angled away just before the intrusion. Another technical glitch. Standing in my disheveled office in hastily thrown-on clothes, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. This had crossed from professional sabotage into something more sinister. The invasion of my space carried a message. Nowhere was safe. But as I surveyed the damage, I noticed something the intruder couldn't have known. The files they'd so carefully searched weren't the ones that mattered. The information they sought wasn't kept here at all. For the first time since this battle began, I smiled. A small, private smile of grim satisfaction. Let Brant think he was winning. Let him believe his tactics were working, that I was crumbling under the strain. Let him grow confident, careless. The true game was just beginning. I called an emergency meeting with my closest team members the following morning. Seated in a small conference room with Neve and 2 others I'd come to trust, Jordan from analytics and Dana from client relations, I explained the office break-in without revealing my suspicions about who was behind it. From now on, we operate with complete transparency among ourselves, but absolute discretion with everyone else, I instructed. All sensitive documents are digital only, protected with dual authentication, and backed up to our private server. "You think someone's deliberately targeting you?" Jordan asked, his usually relaxed demeanor tense. "I know they are." I met each of their eyes. "And they're not just after me. They're after this team's success, which means they're after your success too." For the next 2 weeks, I maintained a careful balancing act. Publicly, I appeared increasingly stressed, working late, looking tired in meetings, reacting with barely concealed frustration to the accidents that continued to plague my projects. Privately, I was building an invisible network of information and evidence. Neve became my eyes and ears among the mid-level employees, where gossip flowed more freely. Jordan discreetly monitored digital traffic patterns, identifying suspicious access to my team's files without triggering IT security alerts. Dana, with her warm personality and genuine interest in people, cultivated relationships with executive assistants, the true gatekeepers of corporate information. Meanwhile, Brant's confidence grew visibly. In meetings, his challenges became more direct, his helpful suggestions more condescending. Twice, he arrived unannounced at client meetings I was conducting, offering to clarify points I'd supposedly misrepresented. The most damaging incident came during the quarterly finance review. As I presented my department's numbers, Weston interrupted with a question about discrepancies between my reported client retention rates and the financial outcomes. According to these figures, he said, sliding a document forward, 3 major clients have reduced their service packages in the past month, yet your retention report shows no change in status. The entire room turned to me. I felt the trap closing. I hadn't been informed of any service reductions. May I see that report? I asked, maintaining composure while my mind raced. The document he provided showed clear reductions in 3 client accounts my team managed. I wasn't made aware of these changes, I admitted, scanning the figures. I'll need to investigate immediately. Curious, Brant interjected from across the table. The account managers report directly to you, don't they? Strange they wouldn't inform you of million-dollar reductions. The implication hung in the air. Either I was lying, or I had completely lost control of my department. Very strange indeed, I agreed, meeting his gaze directly, almost as if someone had instructed them to bypass normal reporting channels. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed Brant's face before his expression smoothed back to polite interest. After the meeting, I immediately called the account managers responsible for those clients. All 3 told identical stories. They'd received emails, apparently from me, instructing them to process the reductions but delay reporting until after the quarterly review to avoid unnecessary concern. The emails had come from my account but weren't written in my usual style, some they'd noticed but hadn't questioned given the apparent urgency. I requested copies of these emails, only to discover they'd been permanently deleted from the system, not just archived but completely erased. Someone with high-level IT access had covered their tracks. When I reported this to Merrick, his response was measured but troubling. Isla, I want to believe someone is interfering with your work, but these explanations are becoming increasingly elaborate. He chose his words carefully. The board is concerned about the pattern emerging. First, the client presentation. Now these financial discrepancies. These aren't discrepancies. They're fabrications, I insisted. Someone accessed my email account, sent fraudulent instructions, then deleted the evidence. Merrick sighed. Do you hear how that sounds? Like someone's gaslighting me? I finished. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. His expression shifted to one of concern. I'm going to suggest something, and I want you to consider it without immediately rejecting it. Maybe you should take some time off, a few weeks to decompress. The transition to executive level is stressful, and sometimes, I don't need time off, I interrupted, struggling to keep my voice level. I need support against what's clearly targeted sabotage. If you can provide concrete evidence, I'll act immediately, Merrick promised. But without it, my hands are tied. As I left his office, I spotted Brant waiting nearby, ostensibly reviewing documents on his tablet. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Rough meeting? He asked with manufactured sympathy. Nothing I can't handle, I replied coolly. Of course, he agreed. Though if you ever decide the executive pressure is too much, there's no shame in stepping back. I'd be happy to help with the transition, ensure a smooth handover. The naked ambition in his offer should have infuriated me. Instead, it clarified everything. This wasn't just about humiliating me or forcing me out. Brant wanted my position. He'd orchestrated this entire campaign to make me fail so spectacularly that he would be the obvious replacement. That night, I received another text. Ready to discuss terms of your resignation yet? I can ensure it's handled gracefully. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Neve. It's time, I told her. Activate the protocol. The protocol, as we'd code-named it, was the countermeasure I'd been quietly building since the office break-in. For weeks, Jordan had been running a parallel shadow system that logged all access to my official accounts, capturing activity invisible to the company's regular monitoring. Dana had been having casual coffees with assistants throughout the executive floor, building a timeline of Brant's movements and meetings. Nev had created a secure repository of all communications, duplicating everything in real time to a server that couldn't be accessed from within the company network. Most importantly, I'd been feeding Brant exactly what he wanted: the appearance of a woman cracking under pressure, making small mistakes, becoming increasingly paranoid, all while laying a trap he wouldn't see until it was too late. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the entire executive committee, including board members, for the following day. The topic: departmental security and performance review. Merrick approved it with visible reluctance, warning me privately that this needed to be substantive, not speculative. That afternoon, Brant stopped by my office, leaning against the doorframe with casual confidence. "Heard about your big meeting tomorrow," he remarked. Bold move. "I thought it was time to address concerns directly," I replied, pretending to focus on my screen. "Admirable, though sometimes admitting defeat is the more graceful option." He studied me with what might have passed for genuine concern if I hadn't known better. "The strain is showing, Ayla. Everyone sees it." I looked up, allowing him to see exactly what I wanted him to see: exhaustion, frustration, barely contained anger. "I appreciate your concern. It's not too late to control the narrative," he continued. "A voluntary step back now would preserve your professional reputation. Push this further," he shrugged eloquently. "Well, recovery becomes more difficult. I'll keep that in mind." After he left, I sent a company-wide email announcing I'd be working remotely for the rest of the day to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. It was the signal to my team: implement the final phase. That evening, Neve called to confirm everything was in place. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything," I told her. "He's overplayed his hand. Tomorrow, we finish this." I slept surprisingly well that night, waking with the clear-headed focus I'd always experienced before major presentations. I chose my outfit carefully: a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without flashiness, paired with the vintage watch my father had given me when I completed my MBA. "For timing your moves perfectly," he'd said. The boardroom was full when I arrived, exactly 3 minutes before the scheduled start. Brant sat near the head of the table, looking relaxed and slightly amused. Hamilton and Weston wore expressions of thinly veiled impatience. Merrick nodded to me, his eyes communicating a clear warning: "Make this good." I connected my laptop to the presentation system, aware of every eye on me. The room quieted as I stood. "Thank you all for making time for this meeting," I began. "Over the past months, there have been concerns about my department's performance and my leadership. Today, I want to address those concerns comprehensively." I clicked to the first slide, a simple timeline showing my department's client retention metrics since I'd taken over. As you can see, despite recent reports to the contrary, our actual retention rate has improved by 22% quarter over quarter. The apparent discrepancies reported last week were based on fraudulent reductions processed without client authorization. Weston frowned. "That's a serious accusation." "It is," I agreed calmly, "which is why I've spent the past month gathering evidence." I clicked to the next slide. This is a log of access to my email account over the past 6 weeks. The highlighted entries show access from devices not registered to me during times when server records confirm I was logged in elsewhere. The room shifted uncomfortably as I continued through my presentation, methodically laying out evidence of systematic sabotage: the falsified client materials, the deleted emails, the manipulated financial reports, all presented not with emotional accusations but with forensic precision. "The question," I said, approaching my conclusion, "isn't whether sabotage occurred. The evidence makes that undeniable. The question is who had both the access and motivation to orchestrate it." I clicked to a final slide showing a comprehensive timeline correlating the sabotage incidents with server access logs, building security records, and calendar appointments. Only one person had the necessary access: technical knowledge and motive, I stated, turning to face the room directly. The same person who has a documented history of similar behavior at Western Solutions and Archer Dynamics. The room went utterly silent. Brant's expression hadn't changed, but a muscle twitched near his jaw. Isla, Merrick said carefully, are you directly accusing Brant Pierce of corporate sabotage? I'm presenting evidence, I corrected. The conclusion seems obvious, but I'm sure the board will want to conduct its own investigation. I paused, then added, particularly given the potential legal implications for the company if clients discover their accounts were manipulated without authorization. The threat wasn't subtle. If this became public, the company would face not just embarrassment but potentially significant legal liability. Brant finally spoke, his voice controlled but tight. This is absurd. You've constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory because you couldn't handle the executive role. He turned to the board members. She's been increasingly paranoid for weeks. Everyone has noticed. Paranoia implies unfounded fear, I replied evenly. The evidence suggests my concerns were entirely justified. Evidence that could easily have been manufactured, Brant countered, just as you claim I manufactured evidence against you. It was the moment I'd been waiting for. The final trap. That's a reasonable doubt to raise, I acknowledged, which is why I haven't relied solely on digital evidence that could potentially be manipulated. I removed a small device from my pocket. For the past month, on the advice of corporate security following the break-in at my office, I've recorded all my professional conversations. Brant's composure slipped for the first time. That's illegal in this state without consent. Actually, it's not, I corrected. This is a single-party consent state for recordings, but your knowledge of wiretapping law is interesting. I pressed play, and Brant's voice filled the room. The strain is showing, Ayla. Everyone sees it. A voluntary step back now would preserve your professional reputation. Push this further. Well, recovery becomes more difficult. That proves nothing, Brant said dismissively, though his face had paled slightly. Agreed, I replied, which is why I have this. I pressed play again, and another recording began. Brant speaking to someone else. Just make sure the numbers show significant client losses before her presentation. Nothing traceable. Yes, exactly like before. By the time she figures it out, the damage will be done. The board's already questioning her stability. No, Merrick won't protect her. He can't afford another public relations problem after last year. 3 more weeks of this, and they'll be begging me to step in. As the recording played, Brant's expression transformed from confidence to shock to cold fury. When it ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Where did you get that? He demanded, voice barely controlled. You should be more careful about where you have sensitive conversations, I replied. Corner offices have surprisingly thin walls. The truth, which I didn't share, was that he'd had the conversation in what he thought was the privacy of his office, not realizing that the renovation 2 months earlier had included installation of a new HVAC system with vents that carried sound between adjacent offices. Nev, whose office shared that vent system, had captured the conversation on her phone when she recognized his voice discussing me. Merrick was the first to recover from the stunned silence. Brant, do you have any response to this recording? Brant's eyes never left mine. It's obviously edited, manufactured. She's been planning this setup for weeks. Again, a reasonable concern, I acknowledged, which is why I've provided the original recordings to our legal department for authentication. They can confirm no editing has occurred. This is ridiculous, Brant snapped, looking around the table for support. Are you really going to take her word over mine based on some recordings that could easily be manipulated? The desperation in his voice was becoming evident. Hamilton and Weston exchanged uncomfortable glances. There's an easy way to resolve this, I suggested. A forensic examination of the server access logs, email records, and financial transactions in question. If I've manipulated evidence, that will be discoverable. If you've been accessing my accounts and falsifying documents, that will be equally clear. If I've manipulated evidence, Brant stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be accused. Sit down, Brant, Merrick ordered, his voice sharp. You absolutely do have to sit here. This is now an official corporate investigation. The meeting continued for another 2 hours as I methodically presented each piece of evidence. Throughout, Brant's demeanor shifted from outrage to calculating to increasingly desperate. By the end, even Hamilton and Weston were viewing him with barely concealed disgust. When I finally concluded, Merrick asked Brant to leave the room while the committee discussed next steps. As he passed my chair, Brant leaned down and whispered, "This isn't over." I smiled slightly. "Actually, it is." After he left, Merrick turned to me. "You've been gathering this evidence for weeks. Why wait until now to present it?" "I needed to be certain," I replied, "and I needed enough evidence that there could be no doubt, no way to dismiss it as paranoia or misunderstanding." "You could have come to me earlier," he said, a note of hurt in his voice. "With respect, sir, I tried, but without concrete evidence, it was my word against his, and he's had years to build his reputation and relationships here." Merrick couldn't deny the truth of this. "What do you want to happen now?" "That's not my decision," I answered carefully. "But I would suggest the company consider how this reflects on its culture and oversight mechanisms. This happened not just because one person acted unethically, but because our systems allowed it to happen." The meeting adjourned with a decision to place Brant on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation. As people filed out, several committee members stopped to speak with me privately, some offering apologies for doubting me, others expressing admiration for my methodical approach to uncovering the truth. Merrick was the last to leave. "You'll have my full support implementing whatever changes you deem necessary to prevent this from happening again," he promised. "And Isla, I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Alone in the boardroom, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. The weeks of stress, of constant vigilance, of being gaslit and undermined, it crashed over me in a wave that left me momentarily lightheaded. My phone buzzed with a text from Neve. "Well?" I replied simply, "It's done." 3 weeks later, I stood before the company's senior leadership team, presenting my department's quarterly results. The room felt different, more engaged, more respectful. The investigation into Brant's activities had been thorough and damning, revealing not just his campaign against me, but similar patterns with other colleagues. He had been terminated for cause, with legal action pending for the client account manipulations. As I concluded my presentation, Merrick stood. "Before we adjourn, I have an announcement. Following recent events, the board has recognized the need for stronger oversight of our corporate culture and ethics. We're creating a new position, Chief Integrity Officer, to implement systematic protections against the kind of behavior we recently experienced." He turned to me. "Ayla, we'd like to offer you this position, in addition to your current role, with a corresponding compensation adjustment. No one has demonstrated a stronger commitment to integrity in the face of adversity." The irony wasn't lost on me. Brant's attempts to destroy my career had instead elevated it to a level he could never have reached. That evening, as I packed up my office, preparing for my move to a larger space on the executive floor, a familiar figure appeared in my doorway. Neve leaned against the frame, smiling. "Chief Integrity Officer Frost. Has a nice ring to it." "Along with a nice salary bump," I added, returning her smile. "One I intend to share with the team that made it possible." "You earned this," she said seriously. "Not just by beating Brant, but by doing it the right way, with evidence, with precision, with integrity. Justice is sweeter when it's incontrovertible." I agreed. As we walked out together, I glanced back at my office, the space where I'd been cornered, threatened, gaslighted, the space where I'd refused to break. My father would have recognized the chess move I'd executed, sacrificing a parent position to create an irresistible trap. Let your opponent believe they're winning until the moment they realize they've lost completely. The following week, I received one final text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this." I didn't bother responding. Instead, I forwarded it to our security team, who added it to the growing file of evidence against Brant. His legal problems were mounting, not just with our company, but with previous employers, whose NDAs no longer seemed to be holding. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's simply exposing who they truly are and letting natural consequences unfold. Brant had built his career on undermining others and taking credit for their work. Now, that same pattern had become his undoing. 6 months later, I stood at a podium, accepting an industry award for corporate ethics, innovations, programs I'd developed based directly on my experience. As I surveyed the room of business leaders, I couldn't help but think of how differently this might have ended if I'd reacted emotionally rather than strategically. The greatest test of leadership, I told the audience, isn't how you behave when things are going well. It's how you respond when faced with systematic opposition. Do you break? Do you compromise your integrity? Or do you find a way to transform obstacle into opportunity? I never mentioned Brandt by name in my speech. I didn't need to. His story had become a cautionary tale throughout the industry. The brilliant executive whose career imploded when his methods were exposed. The true victory wasn't just in keeping my position or even in advancing. It was in changing the system itself, creating structures that would prevent others from experiencing what I had endured. As I often tell young professionals who ask about my journey, sometimes winning isn't about defeating your opponent. It's about transforming the entire game. If you've ever faced workplace sabotage or been undermined by a colleague who couldn't stand to see you succeed, I hope this story gives you strength. Remember that documentation is your ally, patience is your strategy, and integrity is your ultimate weapon. Like this video if you found value in Ayla's journey, comment with your own experiences of workplace challenges, and subscribe for more stories of professional resilience and strategic thinking. Together, we can create workplaces where success is based on merit, not manipulation.